join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we will start tonight's meeting with announcements, and I'll start on my right with Ms. Howard. Any announcements?
None.
Ms. Lemon, Mr. Miller? No announcements. Ms. Krumiller, any announcements?
Yeah, I'll take this opportunity to remind the council that we had a meeting about the freebie changing schedules, and we are going to have another meeting where we approve the exact schedule, since we didn't actually look at the specific schedule times, and we've determined that we need to do that. And so that's going to be on October 23rd, I believe, at our 23rd meeting. I just wanted the public to start getting ready for the change also, because we anticipate that we're reducing the service to the train stations in the morning, but we're expanding the service to the neighborhood as we discussed. And I think it's going to be better and serve more people, but it is a change.
Thank you. Ms. Butler, any announcements?
No.
And Mr. Quinn?
None.
Okay. My only announcement is this Friday, September 29th, I'll be at the Princeton Public Library from 8:30 to 10 a.m. for just open office hours. You don't need to make an appointment. So if there's any questions or concerns, or you just want to chat about something of interest, please stop by. I'll be in the library lobby on Friday morning. And with that, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. We can take these.
I'll make.
You want to move them as a block?
I'll move them as a block.
Is there a second? So it's
No.
been. Oh,
I'm sorry. I was absent at one of the meetings. I'm sorry.
I'll move them as a block, approved by everyone who was present at the appropriate meetings.
well,
Is that okay?
Well, I don't know. Maybe Joe, which was.
Well, I was just going to make one small change
okay,
to June
sorry.
12th. I'm sorry. On the closed session, it indicates that the mayor and Ms. Howard were absent. I think more appropriately, they were recused on one item, and I think it's probably might be good to have on the record that that was the situation.
All right. Would you like to move the closed session minutes for June 12th, or the regular session meeting minutes from June 12th as a block? Seconded by Ms. Krumiller. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes from June 12th passed. Next, we come to the closed session minutes of June 22nd, 2017. Moved by Mr. Miller, seconded by Ms. Krumiller. Any corrections on these? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes pass, and next we come
Well,
to...
I'm going to abstain because I was, or whatever. And I think actually, Heather, you were absent on that second set of minutes too. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You were absent on the 26th. This is the 26th we're now?
Yes, Heather and I believe were both absent on the 26th.
Okay, so now we'll come to the closed session minutes of June 26th and the open session minutes from June 26th. Is there a motion to
So moved.
approve? Moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Mr. Miller. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. And now we come to the public comment portion of the meeting, and we'll start with the list for folks that had signed up ahead of time, and then I'll open it up to anybody else who'd like to speak on items that are not already on the agenda. And I would ask when you come to the mic that you state your name and address and keep your comments to 3 minutes, because we do have a pretty full agenda tonight. So first I'd like to call up Lisa Wu. You have to get very close to the microphone.
Can you? I'm sorry. It was not turned on. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, I also want to address the OAA program. I brought 2 support members from my senior housing, Ruth and Manny. Anyway, the reason I said that Princeton has a location is I found out 2 weeks ago, September 10th, that Senior Center host a big event. It was, this is a program called Sourcing Health Locally. The event is from 9 o'clock until 2 afternoon, so they include a lunch. And approximately the attended people is almost 150. So for Susan Haskin, the director of the Princeton Senior Center, say that the building is not equipped to provide lunch. I found out how to believe, because of this event that proved that building can serve up to 150 people. Secondly, I just received the fire alarm ordinance this afternoon. But first of all, it doesn't have a date when it's going to take effect. Secondly, I found that the fine does not equal to whatever it's going to cost. So I'm asking to the city of Princeton provide me approximately each time when there's a fire alarm being called, how much would cost. For this fine, $25 and $50 and $100, it's a joke. I need to know how much it would cost for the police car to dispatch and also fire truck. Sometimes not only one. Labor Day, September 4th, it was 5 fire truck dispatched to my apartment, MCOR. So I need that information. And also, the previous that I was concerned was on the August 7th and also September 11th. I also need the answer for that, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't think we have that information off the top of our heads, but okay, that'd be great. Maybe at our next meeting, we can have an estimate of how much it costs when we have an alarm for the trucks to go out and the police force to go out. Okay.
Sorry.
All right, next is Paul Driscoll.
Paul Driscoll, Harris Road. And I'm actually coming back tonight to speak about what I spoke about at the last meeting. It boils down to 2 questions. You all received my email, I think, that I sent out on Friday. And the 2 questions pertain to the proposed senior citizen complex, the 76-unit complex that's being proposed at the shopping center area. And the 2 questions really boil down to, is it possible that council or somebody in our government could request the developer to put in masonry firewalls instead of core board firewalls? And the second question is can they upgrade to NFPA 13 sprinkler systems as opposed to 13R sprinkler systems? And I know that developers have volunteered to do this before, and it was the question that I brought up at the last meeting, but my eloquent colleague Alexi Asmus came in after me, and she kind of got you off on the subject of the 24/7 fire watch. So I'm wondering, what is the procedure? What is the means to ask the developer? Does council do that? Do we present it at a planning board hearing? I think it's a good opportunity to make this complex a lot safer. And the reason I passed out that picture, that's a fire that took place in Evans, Georgia. Those really are senior citizens, and they are out there at 3:30 in the morning. And you could look closely at that picture. I tried to make them as clear as possible. You're getting basically people in walkers and wheelchairs, and they're basically not very mobile. And you see those houses burning to the ground, and they can't do anything except watch. And those people at their age are not going to be able to replace everything that they have. So it's a major traumatic loss. So if somebody could address, does anybody have any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't want to get in a back and forth right now, but if, is that the extent of the questions? I mean,
It's basically two
So
questions.
this doesn't come to council. It would go to the planning board, the senior center, and I don't know if the application has been deemed complete or not. I'm not sure the exact status of it, but ultimately, I believe it would go before the planning board, and I would certainly encourage both Ms. Krummeller and Mr. Quinn, who sit on the planning board, to raise those issues. I remember the Avalon Bay complex did agree to those fire safety standards, and I think it would be great if they were sort of informally the standard we expect in Princeton. As you know, the state law doesn't require it, and so we can't require it, but I see no harm with us asking for it.
So then this can or should be addressed at a planning board hearing?
At a planning board meeting when that application is being heard, but I don't, like I said, you'd have to check the planning board calendar because I don't know
Okay.
if it's been scheduled yet.
All right, thank you.
Sure. And is there anybody else? Oh, sure.
In the photo that you provided to us, can you tell me how many stories there are in the building that's burning?
I think it's 2 stories, but I'm not sure. I have to double check.
I think it looks more like 4 to me.
Well, I'd have to look at it. I have the picture.
Okay. Is there anybody else who wanted to speak on any items that are not already on the agenda?
Looks like a variation, but I can double check and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kate Warren, Jefferson Road. Hello, everybody. I just want to follow up sort of on what Paul's talking about. You know, when I saw that article about the Avalon Bay and the woman whose daughter is really traumatized and whose marriage has broken down over the stress of such a terrible fire, and now with this proposed senior development, the shopping center, I'm sure Edgewater, they faced 2 fires at that site, one during construction and one while it was fully occupied. And I'm sure that they felt they had all the ordinances in place that they needed. They had 15 years between the 2 fires to make sure they had the ordinances they needed. So it's not that I don't trust our fire safety department or any of you, but I'm wondering, you know, did you look at what their ordinances are to see if ours are as stringent or less stringent? It just seems to me that this is the opportunity to really go beyond and to make really strong request that that building be built to the highest standards as it possibly can to avoid. I don't want to be in a position, you know, 15 years is a long time for them to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to anything that's not already on the agenda? Okay. We'll move on then to reports, and we have Lieutenant Morgan here with us tonight for the July police report.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Pleased to report that all is well within the police department overall.
You might want to get a little closer to your mic so folks can hear you.
me? Can you hear me now? All right, there we go. First, I'd just like to mention a little bit about what we've done in regards to our community policing philosophy within the department. As you're all familiar with, our annual youth academy, police youth academy, we had in August. We had about 20 recruits come through the program again this year. As you guys know, it's an opportunity for kids from Princeton to come in and see what it's like to be a police officer within Princeton. They get to do different things such as crime scene investigations, motor vehicle investigations, a canine demonstration. So it's just a great opportunity within the police department. The kids have a tremendous amount of fun, and quite frankly, I don't know who has more fun, us or the kids. It's great having the kids in the building. It's a very successful program. So that was in August. Along those same lines, our Safe Neighborhood Bureau participated in 2 block parties, one at Reading Circle, the other one in the Jackson Witherspoon area, where they actually worked the grill in the neighborhood at the party. And again, it's just about interacting with the community and trying to create positive relationships. So we think we've been very successful on that end. Moving on to discuss traffic. Obviously, with the 206 bridge closure that's been there, there's been a considerable amount of traffic, obviously, with a major artery being broken for quite some time now. We had a concern in the police department with school starting and the increase in volume, especially trying to get to the Hun School. We took advantage of our new variable message boards. Perhaps you saw them, 206 southbound and northbound on Lovers, trying to alert the motoring public what decision needed to be made prior to getting to the intersection. We had state police out there for 2 days. We had our officers out there for 2 days. And now it's a regular post in the morning where we assign an officer to monitor the flow of the traffic at the 206 and Lovers intersection. If it does get backed up, they'll go out there and try to help with the flow of traffic. But obviously, it's difficult with such a congested area with 206 bridge being closed. So hopefully that'll be done in sooner rather than later. The variable message boards, as I mentioned, we used them for the 206 detour there. They have been absolutely fantastic for us. We've used them the first week prior to the first week of school to we put them in and around the schools just to advise the motoring public that school was going to be in session, be alert that there was going to be more pedestrian traffic in the area. You may have seen one on Mercer. So when there's not a specific event that we need the variable message board for, we're going to put it in high volume areas. Again, just as reminders to the public to be safe when they're driving. And lastly, our 5 new hires, the one officer is on our FTO program. She's probably about a month into the program, and she's doing very, very well. We're very pleased with her progress. And the remaining 4, in about 2 weeks, they're going to start the police academy. And right now, they are assisting us with the shortage in our communications center. So they've been filling in there, but in a couple of weeks, we will lose them to the police academy. And that's a snapshot of the police department. But like I said, overall, things are very well. If you have any questions, I'd be
Ms. Howard?
Yeah, Chris,
Happy.
so what is FTO that you said she's doing?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's it's called Field Training Officer Program. It's a 3-month minimum program that a new officer will ride with a veteran officer. Once you come out of the police academy, you have the basics of what it is to be a police officer, but we need to train you to be a Princeton police officer. And we handpick the officer to do the training. They go to specific training outside the agency. They'll come back into the agency. We'll train them again as a training officer, and then it's a minimum of a 3-month program. There's various reports that go back and forth to the field training officer commander, and then finally a recommendation, and ultimately the chief of police would sign off on the program to be released.
Got it. And we've seen a spike in the dispatch overtime, so is this going to help, the fact that you've been able to put the trainees on dispatch?
Yes, but only for a short matter of time, to be quite honest, because they are going to the police academy. So we have trained police officers to fill those spots, but again, that spike would come back.
Sure. So that's something that we continually focus on. One other quick thing, you have this really interesting spike in overweight vehicles from 6 to 63, and is that because of the 206 diversion? Or?
Possibly. We get a lot of complaints on Mercer with the bridge, and in order to address the complaints of that area of speeding, truck enforcement, we assign an officer down there at specific times, and that's why you see the increase.
So you think this is a result of stepped-up enforcement?
Yes,
And it must be the 206 too, right? So yeah, 10 times
in part,
as
yes,
many,
I'm sure
yeah.
it is.
Thank you.
Yep.
Chris, I'm looking at the gender and ethnicity report, and my question is, do the people who are stopped self-identify, or does the officer that's made the stop do the identification as to ethnicity?
The officer makes that determination.
And the officer has a checklist that he checks off in terms of filling out a box that says, I've identified this person as Native American, Eskimo, Hispanic.
Correct. So when they make the motor vehicle stop prior to approaching the vehicle, they will make that identification and put it out over the radio. It'll get documented in our CAD system. If they need to correct it, they will. And again, all that information is in our monthly report, and it's reviewed on a semi-annual basis through our risk assessment committee.
Let me just, Bernie, I think this is what Chiefs talked about last time, which is you use that information as a management tool, right?
Absolutely.
able to track.
We look at a lot of different areas when it comes to race, gender, and ethnicity and officer activity. It's not just motor vehicle stops. We look at pedestrian stops, probable cause searches, consent searches. There's probably about 11 different categories that we look at continuously. They are reviewed at multiple layers within the police department, starting with the sergeant on scene, and then a written report from the sergeant, a written report from the lieutenant in charge of the patrol bureau, and then through internal affairs and the risk assessment committee. So all officer activity involving race, gender, ethnicity is evaluated on multiple levels and ultimately reported back to the chief.
But the stopping officer does not ask the individual what they're...
I'm sorry, say that again, sir?
The officer who has made the stop does not ask the individual what their ethnicity is.
No, they are not.
Isn't that noted on the license, the driver's license, if I'm not mistaken?
No.
It's not noted at all?
No, it's the officer's determination. The officer will determine the gender,
the
but
gender.
the race would not be. They would have to make that determination on their own.
The only, but you don't do that for random license plate checks. That's the only thing that you don't keep track
No,
of, right?
we only use that for motor vehicle stops.
Right, because I feel like don't you end up looking at old cars rather than new cars? I mean, I always worry about the fairness of that. Because
No, there is no it's random. There is no
it's totally
determinate-
random. 'Cause
Completely random,
I always wonder how you get those warrant arrests, just randomly.
just random.
Thanks. I've got a couple of things. The academy, the kids' academy
Yes.
camp, do you charge for that?
No, we do not.
And how do you advertise it? I mean, I saw the pictures posted, Twitter and Facebook and whatnot, and it did look like a barrel of fun. But I was also thinking about the diversity of the kids who attend and whether or not everybody would feel comfortable sending their kids, and how do we make sure we're reaching people who might have the least comfortable relationship with the police in our community?
We've used social media. We've used community leaders. We've gone to door in specific areas that have addressed concerns about not being aware of the academy. So we've taken a lot of measures to make sure that that information is out there. And in all my time that we've had this youth academy, I don't recall us ever turning one child away.
So you'll take as many kids as want to attend?
We put a maximum of 25 on there, but we've gone over that.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good deal for working parents to be able to
Yes.
send their kids. But
Yes.
again, I would want to be sure that we're doing everything we can to reach people who might not be comfortable doing that. Also, the speeding stops went from 41 to 101. Was that just
Again,
stepped up
that's
enforcement?
directly as a result of speeding complaints and directed enforcement. So we've been
Okay.
utilizing the signs to help identify where there may be speeding issues in town. If we, according to the data from the sign, if we feel that there is a speeding issue, we do assign an officer to that area. And obviously, with the extension of the enforcement, there's going to be more motor vehicle stops and more summonses for speeding.
We had 2 use of force in July. I don't know if you want to walk through quickly.
Those 2 incidents were medical cases where the individual needed to be taken for evaluation. And in doing so, our officers needed to restrain them to help with the ambulance.
So this kind of continues with the trend. I think Councilman Liverman noticed last month, I guess, that we're seeing more and more of this type of activity.
Yes. But that's something that our officers, we train in yearly. And in fact, there's a training that just came out from the Attorney General's office that every police officer in the state of New Jersey had to go through. But we also do it internally as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just wanted to thank you for the extra speeding enforcement. I know it's hard when you're the officer on the road who's enforcing the speeding, but I think we've talked about it here on council. I know it's one of the complaints we hear the most
Yes.
in terms of public safety in this town, and it feels like everybody feels like they're speeding on their street and they want more enforcement. And
Yes.
so I just hopefully
Yeah, I want to thank you also.
conveying the council's support for this effort, because it is important and it's a huge quality of life issue. We're always in a rush, but if you're living on the street where people are speeding, it makes it unsafe to walk, and it makes it unpleasant. So
Agreed. Well,
thank you.
thank you for your support, and I will certainly pass that on tomorrow.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. All right. Thank you. All right, and then we'll continue with reports, with council reports.
Yes,
Ms.
I have a
Howard, any
few,
reports?
thank you. I can report that Human Services, we've just come off a very successful welcoming week and had a number of great events, and I want to thank my colleagues and so many members of the public who came. The highlights included a naturalization ceremony, which was so exciting to welcome new citizens, a cultural exchange night. We had a tour, I think I see Shirley Satterfield in the audience that I see here, a tour of the African-American history in town, and we had many, one thing we're particularly proud of, we had many community agencies involved in the welcoming weeks. We had the library, LawDef, McCarter Theater, the Garden Theater, the Arts Council, the university, and the Historical Society. So really, it feels good to have to come off that. And then a big success yesterday with the annual gala for the Send Hunger Packing. So, which puts us in good place for another year of meeting food insecurity among young people in town. So thank you there, and thank you to Elisa Nera, who's not here. But Jeff, will you convey that? She did a great job. 2 other quick ones. The flu schedule for our flu shots has been set, so look on our website for when those are. And the next one is that exciting, in a couple weeks, the Public Health Accreditation Board is doing its site visit, is coming to check out our Department of Health as part of our application for accreditation. So be nice to people who look like they're out-of-towners coming in and looking under things, right, Jeff? So we're excited that they're coming. They're going to be meeting with the Board of Health. They'll be meeting with staff. And this is the culmination of a lot of work on the department's behalf, right, to get ready for this site visit. And so we have our fingers crossed. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Mr. Lerman?
Not really, just tomorrow night, the Youth Advisory Committee will meet for the first time, and our guest will be Mayor Lampert. So we're excited to have you tomorrow night. I'm glad I reminded. Thank you.
Public Works Department had a very successful Shred Fest this past Saturday. And those of you who came out and got rid of stuff that's been in your basement that you've wanted to get rid of for a long time, saw Public Works in action, loading up dumpsters with material to go elsewhere. And I'd encourage all the people who came out and those who didn't come out and realized that they still had stuff in their basement they want to get rid of to look for the next Shred Fest. It's a good opportunity to not store stuff that you don't want, and an even better opportunity for it not to wind up along the side of the road waiting for somebody to come along and pick it up.
Mayor, can I jump in? Because I too attended Shredtember Fest, and Bernie, I'm so glad you raised. Please, it was so incredibly well run. You zipped in, gave your stuff, zipped out, and having been to these, sometimes the county does these, and I can't say that it's quite as efficient, and so it really is a credit to the staff, how many people were working and how many people they moved quickly through. So thank you.
Ms. Cromwell? Ms. Butler, any reports? Mr. Quinn?
I might be borrowing from one of your reports, Mayor, but we're pleased that Sustainable Princeton received $100,000 for a climate action plan from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And they're going to be discussing it at the Environmental Commission meeting on Wednesday evening. And they're also going to be sitting down with each of us individually to discuss how this partnership is going to work. So I personally am very excited about this. The goal is to lower our greenhouse gas emissions and better prepare our infrastructure to withstand the sort of climate events that we're seeing on a weekly basis now. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, let me correct it. Our meeting for Youth Advisory Committee is Thursday and not Tuesday. So you're right, Mayor, you're right. I mixed up the two meetings, I'm sorry. So she's right.
All right.
As usual, the mayor is always right.
Okay, thanks. I have a few reports. The first is the Neighborhood Character Initiative Group has continued to meet, and we're working with the planning board staff and members of the planning board to put together a second package of ordinances to bring to council. We're looking to do that at the first meeting in January, in part because...
How many garages, aggressive garages, are going to be built between now and then?
Well, the issue is that some of these ordinances speak to one another, and so it makes sense to do them as a package. We didn't want to, you can't introduce an ordinance in 2017 and pass it in 2018, and we wanted to make sure there would be time and to have time for a neighborhood meeting also in advance. So we're putting it off till the beginning of January, but we're hoping to have a whole series of them lined up.
But we note your concern about garages, which we
Yeah.
share.
Yeah. I also wanted to, I see Brett Bonfield here, and I wanted to thank Brett for organizing a working group of executive directors of different nonprofits from the community, and we've been meeting quarterly at the library, and one of the first initiatives to come out of this group is a fundraising calendar, so different groups aren't stepping on one another's toes. So if you're involved with a local nonprofit, make sure to let the library know when your event is so that you can be put on this calendar. And also, it's going to be publicly available so people can see just when other folks are planning their events too. There's an amazing amount going on, and it's nice when it's not all on the same night. Let's see. There was also, it's just sort of remarkable that there were two big 50th anniversary events this past week. So 1967 was a big year in Princeton for starting organizations. So one was the PCDO and the other was the Arts Council. And they both had really terrific events. So I wanted to say happy anniversary to both groups. And that is it for my reports. Are there any staff reports this evening? Ms. Stockton, let me start.
Good evening. A couple of DOT updates and one on the parking study. DOT has reported that they are on schedule with the Stony Brook Bridges replacement project. And if you recall that, the road is supposed to be open up on November 3rd, Friday, November 3rd, which is perfect timing for the half marathon on the 5th. Last council meeting, I had reported that there was an emergency repair needed on a culvert on 206 up near 707 State Road. Due to a delay in material shipment, that work has been delayed until next week. They anticipate it's about a 4-night repair. The work will take place from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. for 4 nights, and traffic will detour over onto Mount Lucas Road during that time. They have an old culvert that is failing. This is a temporary fix to put steel plates over the top of it to keep it intact until they can get the permits and the funding to replace that structure. And then the last update is with the parking study. We had a meeting last week with our consultant, and we're looking to have the final public meeting the week of October 30th. We've got a couple of dates that we're considering right now, and but that's the idea, is the final public meeting before a final report goes out for the week of October 30th.
Okay, terrific. Did you want to say anything about the emergency repairs on Alexander Bridge?
Sure. Last week, Alexander Street was closed for approximately 24 hours. They had found that there was a failure in the structure that required immediate repair. The roadway was actually deflecting under traffic. And so they came in and did a repair to the structure. I spoke with DOT on that today. They're happy and satisfied with the repair work that was done, but we have, with the support of West Windsor and Princeton University, advised them that it would behoove them to look at replacing that structure or doing a more permanent repair when Mercer County is looking to replace the bridge on the Stony Brook in about 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask what structure you're referring to?
Sure. The state DOT manages all of the DNR canal bridges, and so it's the DNR canal bridge on Alexander Street that had the issue. It's technically, I think, in West Windsor.
West Windsor, right.
Correct. But they had notified us because it did require the shutdown of 1 lane of roadway.
Are there any other staff reports?
Yeah.
Mr. Russell?
Good evening. So a couple updates. One, the website redesign that we've been working on for the last few months. Tomorrow we're happy to announce we'll be having or holding office hours with the vendor, Seamless Gov. They'll be meeting with the website working group in the morning, and then in the afternoon they'll be meeting with all the departments through tomorrow afternoon and Wednesday. So we're hopeful to have some type of mock website within the next month or so. They're going to take all this information and put it into that mock website, and then we'll start to show it off to everybody once the product gets developed. On a second note, we're excited that we've been through a couple rounds of applications and interviews for the animal control officer position, and we're optimistic that we'll have a final candidate by the end of the week. So we're happy to have that, as Montgomery's been providing backup service, and we're hopeful to have somebody serve in the community soon.
Great, thank you. Any other staff reports? Nope, okay. We'll move on then to our first work session of the evening, which is on the waxwood. And can I just get a show of hands if you're here for this work session? Okay. So we're going to start. I'm going to ask Mr. Hillier to come up and review the two proposals that have been made to council. We'll have any questions from council for clarification or any other questions folks have initially. We'll open it up to any members of the public who want to speak, and there is a sign-up sheet that we didn't start with names on, so just after you speak, if you can come and put your name on the list, and that ensures that we spell everything accurately for the minutes, and it just helps the clerk keep track. And then we'll bring the discussion back to council. We do have a resolution on the agenda, you'll see. So we are expecting to take a vote at the end of the discussion this evening. I believe this is maybe the fourth time council has discussed this issue. It's been a challenging issue for us to grapple with, and I think we each of us have been on different have had different thoughts on this as we've moved along, and I want to thank everybody from the neighborhood and from the community who's been here to ask questions and to be part of those discussions. But I think we feel that we have spent a lot of time on this. We have other things on our agenda, so if we're able, I hope that we can bring this to a vote at the end of tonight's discussion. So with that, I'd like to invite up Mr. Hillier, and if you just want to review with council the two proposals that were sent.
I'm going to have some charts to show you. So first of all, I'd like to thank you, Mayor Lampert, and the council for all of your time and effort that you've put into this. And I hope that we can tonight resolve it. One point of clarification: in the letter that I sent you, I said that I had enclosed the letter from Dan Reese, the attorney for the owner, and unfortunately, in collating everything for you, we didn't include that, but we sent it to you today. And Dan Reese is here today if you'd like to question him about it. Your decision tonight is simply whether to have the affordable units and the foundation units be put up for sale as condos, or to have 7 of these units rented as 3 low and 4 moderate income units, affordable units. This is the so-called option 1. Option 2, which I had proposed, provided for a fund to be loaned to families in economic distress, and that option provided for 6 affordable units to be rented. And I understand there's still interest in the community for this option, and I think the decision tonight is, should we sell or should we rent? And if option 2 is attractive, the administration of that fund needs to be worked out. There is not time to do that tonight or an intention. We had a community meeting on Saturday, and this was raised as something that the community would like to see. So the issue tonight is rental or sell, and I appreciate the difficulty of the decision. I want to make it clear at the outset that what I'm proposing is not in any way for my personal gain or profit. And I want to show you, I'd like to show you here the revenue. Here, I'll put this up higher. This is just to get it clear that we are not doing this for any gain, but we're doing it, frankly, to provide more affordable units for the community. This is per the 2003 developers agreement. The income, if it was enforced today, the income from the market rate units, the income from the affordable rate units, and the income from the foundation units. But this is the way it is today in terms of the rent from the market units is the same. the affordable rate is a little less than the agreement, and that's because we've made some concessions to people who needed help in having a shelter, a roof over their heads, but they couldn't afford it. And then the foundation units, if they were rented according to the agreement, would generate this kind of an income. As of today, this is what they're generating. And so you can see that per the agreement, you would have $77,000. And as proposed, we're going to have $72,000 per month. So there's a $5,000 almost delta between the two. I just want to make that clear. Now, aside from making the building a bit easier to manage and certainly easier and simpler to maintain with all renters, my goal has been to make as many affordable units as I can available to the widest number of members of the Witherspoon-Jackson community, the so-called citizens who live there would be the priority, and they have to have lived there for 10 years. And you heard that from Mayor Mildred Trotman at our last working session. So let me just repeat. I want to make as many affordable units as I can available to the widest number of members of the Witherspoon-Jackson community. We're all concerned about Princeton becoming increasingly unaffordable to a growing number of people. And I am specifically concerned about the impact of this economic fact on the members of the Witherspoon-Jackson community, especially given the tax increase that they've had to endure recently. What I've developed for you here is a chart that shows the difference between ownership, the cost of ownership, and the cost of rental to a person living in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. A foundation unit, if it were purchased, would be, we've talked about a discounted price of $310,000 with the loan for the down payment that we would be providing. It comes to a mortgage of $248,000, which is 80% of that. And we have here the moderate unit, which would sell for $115,000, and the low unit, which should sell for $65,000. These two units, because they're low income, can have a 95% mortgage. And we'll get into what that means later, but we've gotten help from your low-income person who's helped us sort this through. Now, here are the monthly mortgage payments at a 4.5% mortgage for 30 years. A 30-year rather than a 25 because it gives you a lower number. Here's the foundation payment and the moderate and low payments to the bank. Then we have the condo fees, which are $320, $300, and $290. And there is condo insurance, which one has to have, $80, $70, and $60. And then the property taxes, which are here based on the value of the unit. And then there is private mortgage insurance, which is required when you have a 95%, when you have it over a 90% mortgage. And so that is for the moderate $71 a month, and for the low, it's $40 a month. So here's the total to purchase. This is the current monthly rent that we have. Our average rent for the foundation units is now $1,356. That's about 60% of what we could have charged if we had stuck with the original agreement. We've lowered that, frankly, because of the income of the people who are renting these units. This is the rent of a moderate income unit, and this is the rent for a low income unit. And the difference is substantial. It's $836 less to rent than to own for the foundation units, $253 a month when you have, or 27% more to own than to rent, and it's 18% more to own versus renting. Now, what's interesting about this is the income that it takes. Excuse me. The income that it takes to own versus renting. The national average is you're supposed to spend 30% of your income for shelter. And what you see here is that the income to buy a foundation unit is the income required would be $87,000. There aren't a lot of people in that neighborhood making $87,000 a year. To rent a foundation unit is $54,000. So you can see it's $33,000 less. A moderate income unit, you have to have $47,000 to own it, and to rent it is $37,000, $10,000 less. And for people in moderate and low, these are huge differences. As what somebody pointed out to me the other day, just the utility bill in renting or owning is a major economic factor to people living in the low and moderates. And for the low, we have a 32% income to buy this unit, or $27,000 to rent it. As you can see, and there are, incidentally, some tax deductions that you can have if you own. There's no question about that. The mortgage payments are tax deductible. The interest is tax deductible. Depending on the mortgage, depending on the income level, depending on the interest of the mortgage, that number could vary all over the place. And it ends up being a very small number. It's about, for the foundation unit, it's, the tax deduction would be about $135. For here, it's about $34 a month, and for the low, it's $23 a month. So these are not, there's not a huge tax advantage in the ownership. Also, when you have ownership, you have the maintenance of all the appliances and the replacement of all the appliances. As a rental, that's up to the landlord. As you know, I had a young African-American poll the neighborhood. He spent 2 weeks knocking on doors and talking to people. 2/3 of the people that he talked to were for the rental. 6% were for the sale. And it all has to do with the economics, which I've outlined here. And there were a few that said they didn't care, incidentally. Now, I'm just going to tell you a little story. Before I was about to purchase the Waxwood, which was the Quarry Street School at the time, I had a meeting with the community in the school. And at that meeting, Shirley Satterfield said, if you're going to do something to this building, when you get to the kindergarten, I want you to look for the special tiles that were in that room. And everybody in that room that day was nodding, that's special. And I started to realize how really special this building was to this community. And so that's when I came up with the concept of having the foundation units. And my intention was to provide a way for the residents of this neighborhood or their descendants to remain there. In spite of my best intentions, as Michael Floyd has said repeatedly, the foundation concept was flawed. And I agree. The idea has proven to be a failure. And I regret that, frankly. However, I do strongly believe that the proposed 7 affordable units as rental will enable members of the Wisbon-Jackson community to remain here. In fact, that is already the case. Our 3 affordable tenants have been in there from the beginning, 13 years. And our average, and we have 2 foundation unit tenants that have rented the Waxwood for 13 years, as of next month, actually. Our overall average tenancy for the 34 units over the life of the building has been 5 years and 8 months. That's, in this day and age, for tenants to stay in a building for 5 years and 8 months as an average is really remarkable. My intention is, and it always has been, to do the right thing for this wonderful community that has been so important to the town of Princeton. As I said in the beginning, my goal here is to provide affordable housing to the greatest number of Witherspoon Jackson community members that I can. And having the Waxwood remain as a rental will carry out that original goal. I so hope you will agree. Thank you. I'll take any questions now.
Thank you. Ms. Carmelo, do you want to start?
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that you were kind of leaving out of this discussion about money is equity and who gets the equity. I mean, in one scenario, in a rental, all of the money goes to the owner or you, all the monthly payments. But under an ownership scenario, the monthly payments, even if they're higher, are being paid. It's an investment for the owner. And that's something that is really valuable. It's why I think every single person on this dais is an owner. And most people strive to be owners of their own dwellings, because then everybody knows the money. It's really great to be a landlord, but it's even better to not pay, to not pay rent, to be paying yourself rather than a landlord. So I feel like that was left out of the equation, because totally. I mean, and then for you to say all the money is being paid to you and not the renters, and then to say it's not about money.
No, I don't think it's a matter of that, Ms. Cromwell. It's really a matter of, do you have enough money to do the equity?
But I'm
to
saying,
pay the equity.
Right, that's a different issue.
You
right?
See, you have to pay the interest, and you have to and to build the equity.
Right, so I think we've established that it may be harder for, it may be more, it may be a higher bar for someone to own under the new scenario, but I still think that's not a reason to scrap the idea. I mean, this is what the debate will be, because there are people who, I mean, another big hurdle to ownership is the down payment. Everyone knows how hard it is to save up money for a down payment. And that was the beauty and why I really appreciated your original plan, that you would provide a 20% down payment for these units, which is beyond the reach of most people. And so under the proposal where we scrap that, we're just giving away essentially a value that you promised us. So that's another reason that I'm, very resistant to this, because that 20% down payment for those units could really be a path to ownership. And I do understand that it might be hard for some of the people in the units living right now, but I think we have to make our decisions based on the overall benefit to the community in the long term. And I would also hope that if we stick to the agreement, you could give the tenants flexibility. I would assume you would prefer to keep renting, so we could stick to the original agreement. The current tenants could keep renting, but when they no longer want to live there, the units could be sold with a 20% down payment. That way, that's a win-win situation. That's what I think.
This set of numbers takes into account that 20% down payment.
Understood.
Incidentally.
Understood.
As opposed to if it was their money, it would have cost more here. This number would be higher because of the loss of income from that equity that they had put in.
But I'm talking about, in the end, after 10 years of ownership or 10 years of rental, which position would you rather be in?
Jenny, if I could could I just add on to Jenny's point here?
I think Mr. Liverman was waiting to speak, and then we'll come back.
Thank you, Bob. I think it's time that we look at the realization, or look at what people can afford, and not just what they can afford, but what the community has asked for. The Witherspoon Jackson community, and I'm not the spokesperson, but they're asking for affordable housing. They're asking for, you mentioned shelter. They're asking for a decent place to live in a neighborhood that many of them grew up in, Many of them have been there. There are fewer people that will be able to go with the scenario that Councilwoman Crumiller just mentioned, than go with the scenario that you mentioned in regard to staying in the neighborhood. You know, this isn't a rocket science thing we're doing here. What we're trying to do is provide housing, decent housing, for a lovely group of people. The neighborhood has asked, can we leave these as rentals? The majority of the neighborhood has asked that. Now, we don't have to listen to the neighborhood, not at all. But if we were thinking with our heads and thinking what's best for the majority of people, that's what we will do. Everyone, the majority of people, unfortunately, aren't as, I don't know, I should say, blessed or lucky or whatever, that they can walk into a bank, apply for a mortgage, and get this mortgage for this home. There's other things involved in mortgages. There's credit reports, there's how much you already owe, there's a ton of factors. What you're going to do is take a small amount of folks, and they'll be the only ones that can qualify. Whereas with the rental, we can take a larger mass and fill these units with people that would love it and that could afford to live there. So for me, I'm for, and I've mentioned before, this is nothing new, I'm for the idea of keeping these as rentals. But I'm only for it because it's the best bang for the buck for the majority of people that live in this neighborhood.
Good job. Amen. Good job.
All right, we'll open it up in a minute to folks. Yeah, Ms. Butler?
Thank you. I want to make 2 points. One is just to clarify Mr. Liverman's point, the neighborhood negotiated the original deal. So to be clear on that, when you say the neighborhood wants something, the neighborhood negotiated the original deal. And in fact, I was reading an article from 2002 this morning that was in the Central Jersey, I guess it was, and you were actually quoted, Lance, saying how much you appreciated that neighborhood input was taken into account in coming up with the original deal.
Yeah,
so
and thank you for sending me the article for 2002. I appreciate that. And I was quoted. But,
Yeah.
but you have to remember,
But I
it was just stated.
Excuse me.
It was just stated that the original deal did not work out as we thought it would.
Right. But I'm just pointing out in that the neighborhood was a part of the original deal that was negotiated. To say you can't act like the neighborhood had a lot of input and they thought it was going to be condominium. So to that point. To Jenny's point, I would just like to say that this same article said that the condominiums would start at $175,000. They are currently, I think, assessed at $400,000. So to Jenny's point, had people had purchased way back in 2002, they would have had the benefit of the price appreciation and as part of ownership that you don't get when you are a renter. I think the foundation's units, I think I saw quoted in a different article, I don't have it in front of me, but they were even less than 175. So people would have had significant price appreciation based on the current assessments that we've had. That's another point I want to make. So, but my question I have is for the attorney. Trishka, you with me? On page 3 of our resolution for tonight, and there are only 2 whereases on that page, and the second whereas on that page says, whereas on July 1, 2003, the Borough and Hillier entered into a First Amendment to the developers agreement, providing that all 34 units could be rental units for a period of 5 years instead of condominiums. So it seems to me, reading this, that the developers agreement or the First Amendment involved the entire complex.
Yes.
Right. So I'm asking our attorney for a reason.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For a specific reason, and she knows what it is. Because one of my questions is, if we do not stick to the original agreement, what is our liability from anyone who might have been in any one of the units, not just the foundation units, but any one of the units, assuming that it was going to be condominium. And so based on what I'm reading in this, our resolution for this evening, it looks as if that amendment amended for the entire condominium. You don't need to answer it right now. We can go to other things and you can think about that and we'll come back to it.
Well, that would probably involve legal research to be able to give you an accurate answer.
Well, but do you see what my issue is apropos of an
No, I
earlier
understand. I understand the
conversation we had, that what is our exposure, the municipality's legal exposure to a lawsuit by anyone who may have been in that building, assuming that they were going to buy, if that amendment.
No, I
The-
understand
the
the
only-
question. I'd have to do legal research in order to answer it. I won't be able to answer that question tonight.
The only people who have been in there from the beginning are the 5 people that I mentioned. The others have all moved on. These are all new tenants.
My point is they may have moved on because they had despaired or given up on ever being able to purchase the unit. They may have moved in thinking that they would be able to and then didn't.
Well, there are also statutes of limitation that would apply depending on the nature of the claim. So the I'm sorry, it is on. I wasn't close enough to it. There are applicable statutes of limitations depending on the natures of the claims. There are immunities under Title 59. So I really can't answer tonight the municipality's exposure. I can tell you it would not reach back 15 years. So, you know, original owners
Well,
who
it
may
was
have moved
amended
on
in,
since.
it was also amended in '09. Anyway, okay, you can't.
Can I respond to your comment, Ms. Butler? I don't know where the $175,000 came from. We had the units appraised back to 2009, and they were valued at $400,000 then, and they were valued at $400,000 today. And that was done to show or to indicate that there was no appreciation in value. If I can show you the bills, we spent $11 million restoring that building. Take that and divide it by 34, and you'll get to $300,000 in a hurry. And so I don't know where the 175 came
Well,
from.
I'm reading, I'll tell you
It was
exactly
in
where it
several
came from.
newspaper articles.
Central Jersey, February 12, 2002, Jennifer Potash, Borough Zoner's OK condo plan for nursing home. It was a nursing home in the interim school
right.
nursing home. And in the body of the article, it says, the condominiums starting at $175,000 would comprise 31 one-bedroom units and 3 two-bedroom units. So the fact that they're referring to 31, I think the 3
Right.
affordable were going to be at an even lesser
But
price.
in 2002, we hadn't even started construction. So if anything, that was a guess.
All right, but the point remains, if you had been able to purchase a unit in 2002, and I want to support Jenny's
Yeah.
claim that people would have seen some price appreciation.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from any members of council before we open it up for the public? Ms. Howard and then Mr. Miller.
No, it was more of a question on process. I mean, I have some comments, but not particular questions. So should I hold those? Are we going to go to public comment now?
If you want to make
No,
them
I
in
think I'd like to hear
advance
from the
of
comment.
hearing from the public,
No,
you
I'd
can,
like
or
to
you
hear
can
from the
wait.
public.
Either way.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, did you have any questions? Okay, anybody else? Okay, all right, so everybody else okay for now to hear from the public? So I would ask if you'd like to speak, if you can come and line up, just because it helps us to hear from more folks more efficiently. And then when you're done speaking, there's a sheet on the table up front, and you just put your name down and your address, so we can get it right in the minutes. And Mr. Hillier, would you mind just replacing the microphone? So that would be great. So I invite anybody who'd like to speak to come up to the podium now. And please state your name and your address for the record.
Good evening. My name is Bob Lytell. I'm an attorney at Schaeferman Lake, and I represent George Cumberbatch. I was before you at the last working meeting thank you for taking the opportunity to let me say a few words on George's behalf. Let me begin by extending to you George's regrets. The last time we were here, I let you know that George was away in the Midwest taking care of his mother, who was having some health issues. As a result of that, he's used up all of his vacation and personal time. He's scheduled to work tonight. He's actually working tonight, and he doesn't have any more personal time or vacation time to use, and he was unable to get anybody to cover his shift. So he's asked me to be here to speak on your behalf, on his behalf. I can tell you at this evening that George supports the application. You received a letter from the developer of September 21st. That letter, I think, was the result of some impasse that we had reached, and it contains some strong language in it. And over the weekend, I reached out to Chris Tarr to express to him the dismay really George felt with the language that was used. And Chris did express to me Mr. Hillier's regret at using that language and apologized for that. And George accepted that apology. And I think that it was regrettable, but I understand from being in the practice that sometimes when emotions get a little charged, sometimes people say things that they regret. At the end of the day, it was positive. I think our conversation that Chris and I had over the weekend resulted in significant progress, and George's concerns have been addressed. And he asked me today to come and speak to you to let you know that he supports the application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
But did he get a payment from Mr. Hillier for that?
Our discussions with Mr. Hillier are confidential, so it's not a question that I could answer.
Thank you. Are you signing the sheet that's up there? Actually, would you mind moving it to the table so then we can hear from folks? Yep, thank you. Yeah. So
Mayor, can we remind people to line up? That way we'll be able to hear from more people.
Yep, that'd be great.
Good evening. I had applications in for Princeton University housing at Merrick, and I had an application in at Avalon Bay. And neither place accepted my application because of monetary reasons. However, Mr. Hillier had an apartment available sometime that he said would be available by late October or November of 2016. I put in an application in July, and by November the 1st, I had moved in, and it was made, the rent that I pay was made affordable to me due to my income, which I was very much appreciated, his efforts into having me as a tenant. So I'm here to stand by Mr. Hillier and say that I really appreciate his efforts in trying to keep this Waxwood as an affordable rental unit. Thank you.
Thank you very
State
much.
your name. Can you state your name?
Could you tell us your name, please?
Tell us your name. Your name.
Say your name.
Your name.
You can just say it to us.
I didn't hear it.
Good evening. My name is Sharon Campbell. I live at 86 Lee Avenue in Princeton. I grew up in Princeton, so I'm one of those more than 10-year people and descended from more than 10-year residents of this town. I did not know this gentleman. I probably knew him when I was younger. I didn't know who he was just now. And our stories are very similar. I lived away from Princeton most of my adult life and returned 4 years ago. I moved back into my family home on Lee Avenue. When my mother died, we had to sell the house because we couldn't afford the taxes. And I was so fortunate enough to find another place to live temporarily, also on Lee Avenue, and that has worked out well, but it was not a permanent agreement. So I have been looking for permanent housing for 4 years. I was disqualified from the Merrick Stanworth properties, and I didn't even apply for Avalon Bay, even though I thought about it. My story includes home ownership, as Ms. Krumler. It took me a long time to buy into the American dream of home ownership. And I decided to finally buy a house in 2004. I said, okay, I'm going to do this. Then the housing market crashed. So any hope of equity that I had was not going to be realized. I lost my job because of the economics of that time, and I ended up losing my house because I no longer had a job where I could afford the mortgage. That's why I didn't qualify for the affordable housing that was offered in Princeton because of my credit score, so I've been working on that. In August, I had an opportunity to meet and talk with Mr. Hillier about my housing desires, and like Mr. Evers, he offered me rental unit at the Waxwood at a rate that is affordable for my income. It's like 30% of my income, and it's just right, and my time is up. So I really do appreciate it and definitely support affordable housing for people, senior citizens like me especially.
Thank you.
Good evening. Leighton Newland, Birch Avenue. First and foremost, the two people that preceded me gave powerful dialogue about why this gentleman deserves this community's support. Quickly, just as I get started, I want to say that this has been hotly contested amongst key stakeholders and representatives in the community. And while we did reach, I would say, a consensus on several issues, there's even a lot of disagreement within Witherspoon Jackson. But saying that, let me say that the Waxwood matter is central to the core issue of maintaining an African American presence in the town of Princeton. Bob Hillier had a vision and transformed the Quarry Street School into a premier location in the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood, now Princeton's 20th historic district. Kept the structure's historic integrity and marked it with signage that tells its rich and glorious story. If I stopped there, that would be most commendable. However, he also entered into an agreement with the town of Princeton, along with the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood, that units would be set aside solely for longtime African American residents of Princeton and their heirs. He did so recognizing that the building was more than just brick and mortar. It was a symbol of perseverance, pride, pain, suffering, and of great progress. On at least 2 different occasions, Bob Hillier appeared before this body under various configurations to ask for extensions to his original developer's agreement, and was allowed by this body the ability to maintain all units in the Waxwood as rental units, rather than to offer them for sale as condominiums. When Mr. Hillier last appeared before this body on the matter, one and only one of his tenants took issue with the decision to maintain it as a rental building and wanted to exercise what he believes is his right to purchase his rental unit as a condominium. That issue is between Mr. Hillier, the individual, and unfortunately, the municipality of Princeton, who, as I stated before, agreed and allowed Mr. Hillier to continue with rental agreements versus sales. The issue now before this body is whether, under various options, to allow Mr. Hillier to continue to keep the units as rentals. The fact is that those individuals who are current residents and qualify under the historic familiar guidelines do not have the ability to purchase their units, and turning them into condominiums would be devastating to the people who live there and the neighborhood at large. The fact is that more Witherspoon-Jackson residents, over time, will be able to live there as renters than will ever be able to reside there as owners. That is by far and away the most important consideration facing this body. In meetings over the last 2 weeks of interested neighborhood reps, the three basic issues became a clear consensus: to maintain a Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood preference, to maintain affordability, and as you can see from the two people who preceded me, Mr. Hillier has worked down rental structures to accommodate the incomes of those he rents to. That is unheard of in this town. That just don't happen. Last, and to keep the building as rental versus conversion to condominiums. One last thing, in even several of our community-based meetings, I have never heard Mr. Hillier described as ruthless, but on several occasions, I have heard him described as shrewd. Well, shrewd is having or showing sharp powers of judgment and being astute. Bob Hillier is a businessman, and if being shrewd properly describes him, then that is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Leighton, would you mind signing the form up front? Thank you.
You noted earlier that we've had a number of meetings on this. If we don't stick to the 3-minute time limit for comments, we've already had a 2-hour meeting solely on this subject. And we have other business. We're going to be here all night.
Okay, well, let's get on with the comments. Yeah, we want to hear from the community for sure. So.
Michael Floyd, 35 Quarry Street, which is the Waxwood. The group of people that's met a couple times to talk amongst ourselves that Leighton mentioned, I was a part of that group, and we identified some issues, some concerns, what we would prefer. I'm going to touch on a couple of them. First, I do want to go to what Ms. Butler said, or the point she was making. As someone that started out renting there during a period when I thought a 5-year period was going to expire and it was going to go for sale, I was expecting to buy, because that's what people were told. It's a 5-year extension, or if you come in at 4 years, at the end, they're going to be sold. It was never they were not going to be sold. So you're right on that. And at which time, if they were, one would have equity in it. But that was then, and this is now. I do want to ask a question. The last time we talked neighborhood preference, you were going to investigate that. Are you fine with that now? Is that going to be in the agreement? That's good. Then I don't have to address that. Important to us is stratification of rents. So as Mr. Hillier said, it reaches the most number of people. The units are available, the most number. I think that's important, and I think someone's going to speak to that after, sometime after me. We also discussed, and I brought up something that I think, although most of them can be low mod, I would like it not to have on a couple of units a income limit or at least a mod income limit, because then you rule out the workforce housing type. If you wanted to put a 130% of median income, I could see that. But setting rents is one thing, and I had this discussion before the meeting with the mayor. But capping income at 80% of median at the mod, I'd like to see some expansion for a couple of the units. Let's see. I think since the neighborhood preference is not an issue anymore, then that's my main comments here.
Thank you. Michael, can you sign the form when you're done? Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening. I'm Shirley Satterfield. I live at 30 Quarry Street, right across the street from the Waxwood.
Mark, no, just try that.
This one works. Oh, good. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
In 2002, Mr. Robert Hillier met with community residents to announce that he would purchase the building that was a Witherspoon School, then the Princeton Nursing Home, and asked for concerns and input regarding his desire to develop it as an apartment building with units that would be affordable for residents and our descendants. Many residents were in favor of the purchase and pleased that the structure of the school building would remain as it is. Now there is a desire to have the units remain apartments, and that 7 apartments will be affordable for availability to residents whose families have lived in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. I look out every day at that building, and I'm proud of that building. It's where my grandmother went to school, where my mother went to school, where all my relatives went to school, and where 7 of my relatives were teachers. I'm proud that the building is now an apartment building. We don't have too many developers who come to Princeton and have the care that Mr. Hillier has for our people. Keeping the Waxwood apartment shows the importance of giving back to residents who have served Princeton, from servants and laborers to professionals, for centuries in Princeton. And for the council, I hope that you extend positive votes for the Waxwood to remain apartments with 7 units being affordable for those residents who want and deserve to stay in our hometown. Thank you.
I'm sorry to keep nagging folks. Can you come and sign the sheet? Thank you.
I'm Minnie Craig from Witherspoon Street, and my husband and I are here to show support for our friend Hillier, that's what I call him, Hillier, and for the 7 affordable units. Who knows, the people who used to live there no longer live there. You know, it's none of our business why they left or why they're not there now, if they intended to buy or not. And I know 2 people who might even profit from this, of the 7 affordable units. They're now living in a nearby city, very unhappy, scared of where they're living, but that's what they can afford right now, and they were raised in Princeton. They would love to come back to Princeton and live where they were born and raised, instead of being scared to death to take the bus to this city. And who knows, if these apartments are up for sale, I just can picture them not being bought by the neighborhood people. I can picture them being bought by other people who have money to pay as much as they need to pay, and leaving the less fortunate out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for helping me remind.
Good afternoon, good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm Rosetta Bruce, and I live at 191 Witherspoon Street. And I must say that when Mr. Hilliard came to Princeton to develop the office where he is, he did call a meeting and he asked us what do we think about him having the office there. Now, he didn't even have to ask us that. He could have put a warehouse there in front of my house. So I'd like to address all of you to think about putting yourself in the shoes of the people that are renting and say to yourself, can I afford to buy right now? I think most of you would say, I can't afford to buy. I'm already in debt up to my neck. So I'm begging you all to leave it as rental and let the people that are in there let you know how far in debt they are, and they can't afford to even start thinking about buying, and that's why they're renting now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dozier Hammond, Lee Avenue. I think that we have an agreement here that is good but could have been better. I liked option number 2. I like the idea of being able to put some money back in to help people get down payments in the neighborhood, and I think that a number of other people did support option 2 as being the best one. Perhaps improve it even a little bit as much beyond that. If we could have 7 or 8 affordable units along with the 400,000, that's what we would have liked. We would have also liked, and I will say that I'd like the spread of 3 very low, 3 low, and 2 moderates, or some version of that that would go better as far as I'm concerned for having for the neighborhood. I wish we could work out a more complex deal where some people could get condos and some people could have rentals, but I do think in terms of affordability today that a rental is the best way to go, but we might be able to improve the agreement that we have today with the measures that I mentioned, especially option 2 and then the spread that I mentioned. Try to get as much very low and low income units as possible rather than just the moderate. I do agree with Michael Floyd that the moderate could have a higher threshold, maybe an extra $10,000 or $20,000, maybe even a bit more, and that might help offset some of the other costs and allow some people with a little bit higher income to stay. But the main purpose is to help the people with very low and low incomes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Tom Parker. Just coming to say, voice my opinion. I think
Sorry to interrupt. Can you just state your name? Tell me everyone knows who you are. But just
Tom Parker. And just state my opinion, the opportunity to have the community and residential preference for the conversations that Mr. Hilliard has had with the community over the past years. And in the most recent times, when he stood before us on Saturday, he seemed to have put forth his word to this community preference and given opportunity for more folks to be able to stay here. Under today's current market, rental units would be a good way to go. And so therefore, I'm just stepping forward to say I support that action. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
My name is Yaina Moore. I live at 19 Green Street. I agree with Mr. Liverman as well as Ms. Crummeller in that the opportunities for home rental as well as ownership are needed in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. But in this particular case, I think what we're looking at is preserving the opportunities that have already been provided and exist, and looking forward. I participated in the neighborhood of conversations that were referred to by Dozier and others, where we did draw a consensus around keeping at least the rental opportunities there more affordable and long-lasting. And there was particular concern around the years of existence, experience within, or residency in the neighborhood, because it's being considered in a rolling fashion. 10 years now is a different person than 10 years, 15 years ago. So we may not be serving the people who are most in need, because people who've moved in 10 years, within 10 years, are, in many cases, affording much more. The Witherspoon-Jackson Development Corporation was mentioned at your August 16th meeting as a possible recipient of monies that Mr. Hillier committed to in his option 2. And should you decide to consider his offer to dedicate funds in a way that is designed to benefit the neighborhood, not just the Waxwood, but throughout the neighborhood, Witherspoon-Jackson Development Corporation would certainly be delighted to administer those funds in furtherance of its own mission to offer affordability assistance in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. Our programs include different forms of housing assistance for owning and renting, neighborhood restoration for preservation, economic development for local businesses and employment opportunities, and all with a specific interest in serving those with a long history in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood, and in particular with those demonstrating financial need. With regard to Mr. Hillier's proposal, in which he states in part that he would pay $400,000 to provide neighborhood affordability in the form of loans, down payments, and then at the time of properties are sold, they may be paid back. And in other documents and comments where he further proposed to share in the equity, most nonprofit bylaws would preclude accepting monies in any form that other than outright contributions. So Witherspoon-Jackson cannot offer dividends or confer profits from donations. And no part of its net earnings, properties or assets, on dissolution or otherwise, shall inure to the benefit of any private person or individual. And so we would be glad to administer funds as a donation and with specific purposes if you should decide to consider this form of contribution. We've already developed programs, administrative processes that would in fact provide assistance to the neighborhood with property taxes, down payments, homeowner fees, amenity fees, major system repairs, mortgage assistance, home improvements, and to sustain neighborhood affordability. So, should the council continue to have an interest in having a nonprofit administer funds from a private entity towards this effort as per 501c3 charitable organization and guided by our programs, policies, procedures, and offering donors, eligible donors, tax incentives as write-offs, Witherspoon Jackson would be happy to be at your service to confer that opportunity to the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Mayor, could I just say, Ms. Moore spent a lot of time talking about option 2, as did Dozier Hammond. Option 2 is no longer available to us, correct? Option 2 is off. There's no money. There's no that money, the donation, all of that. That's off the table. So, you know, there are a lot of things to comment about this deal, but you might as well not waste your breath on option 2. It's not on the table.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
Hendricks Davis, John Street, where I am the owner of a property that I was helped to acquire through the good work of the Witherspoon Jackson Development Corporation, and indeed, probably the council, in its wisdom way back 34 years ago, had a role to play there as well. I spoke with the developer, Bob Hillier, earlier today to express my concern about this request. And I think you all know what my concern is, because I've come here time after time after time to ask the council to help the town of Princeton figure out a way that we can build affordable housing for sale to low-income, moderate-income residents, particularly residents that have been living here or whose parents lived here, and those that have now been forced to move away or to sell their properties. So that's my concern, that this action really takes the opportunity, the potential for there to be 7 property owners. Maybe not this year, maybe not 5 years from now, maybe not 10 years from now, but at some point in time, it takes that opportunity away for there to be 7 property owners, maybe even with a Princeton preference, right? It takes that, that's off the table.
It does have the Princeton preference.
Yeah, but if you do this, it takes that out of the equation.
No.
So-
Under both scenarios, we have
Okay,
Princeton
yeah,
preference.
for rental, sure, absolutely. So I wish there was a way to tie this somehow or another to an obligation on the part of the council to not only develop affordable housing for rent, but affordable housing for sale to low-income, moderate-income people. The Waxwood is one of the few remaining sites in Witherspoon Jackson where there's the potential for ownership, right? Okay? So I don't know what you're going to do across the street, across the Witherspoon Street, but if you have the opportunity to make some of those units affordable for sale to low-income, moderate-income residents, I strongly encourage that. And if you do that, I would certainly support this request from my friend, Bob Hillier.
Just, I think we need to clarify, and you were in option 2. I heard the man say this at this meeting that he talked to the neighborhood and he was willing to put that back on the table. And I just asked him and he said, yeah. So yes, you may have to revise the you know, the resolution, if
Trishka,
you so
could you,
choose.
Trishka, could you speak to that, please?
Well, I mean, nothing prevents Mr. Hillier from creating that fund. The question before you is whether to allow an amendment to the developers agreement, and there was a written proposal that was sent to you dated September 21, and the proposal was clear and simple. Either have condominium units as per the original developers agreement, or have 7 low and moderate income rental affordable units with the Princeton preference.
And there
Now,
is no fund.
There's no fund in that proposal. If Mr. Hillier separately wants to establish such a fund for the neighborhood, that's fine, but I don't think that has a place in the developers agreement, and that's not the request that was put before you and that you've been asked to act on.
Right, and so...
It was in the developers agreement before, so how can you say it's not appropriate to put it in?
It wasn't.
It's in the original
In a
developers
down-
agreement, but it is not what he's asking us to consider tonight. He has put forth a different request to us. So our choices before us tonight are to go back to the original developers agreement, the one that was where it would be for sale, where the units would be for sale, or leave them rental, but there's no fund associated with that decision as it stands tonight.
Tonight, or you
If
could...
you look at, if you look at the resolution in the, that's in
Yeah.
the agenda packet,
Yeah, I looked at it.
there's no fund.
Well, you can not vote on that and have a revised resolution and vote next time.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
Good evening, everyone. My name is April McElroy, and I know everyone who spoke today. I want to thank you, first of all, for having the opportunity, when I did, for the first 4.5 years at the Waxwood, where 4 of my generations went to school. I think it's important to continue to do the rental. This way, anyone who needs to come back into Princeton, which I may have to go back up to the Waxwood, but I had to move out because my mother was ill. The rental is so important here in Princeton. Those who cannot come back, I feel bad for. There's nothing I can do. I wish I could help them, but don't exclude them. Keep that preference, keep everything going the way it is, and I think we'll be okay, and I'd be glad to work with you on that if I have to. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Anybody? Okay. So I'm going to bring the conversation back to Council. Trishka?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on the question that Councilwoman Butler had posed earlier about Princeton's exposure to potential claims by residents who might have wanted to buy the market rate units. I've thought about it some more. Again, I can't give you a fully researched definitive answer, but I think that Princeton's exposure would be minimal to non-existent, but more importantly, I pulled up the actual July 1, 2003 First Amendment to the Developers Agreement, which deals, although there's a reference to, yes, having the whole building be rentals, it deals only with the affordable units and the foundation units, as did the underlying Developers Agreement and all subsequent amendments. So the Developers Agreement only ever dealt with the foundation units, the affordable units. That's carried forward all the way through, and it's the same thing that you're being asked to deal with this evening. So, so I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. I had a question for Mr. Hillier, actually, that I didn't ask originally, which was, so right now there's the 3 affordable and the 5 foundation units, and those are mostly filled. There is one vacancy, or what's the status right now? Yeah, can you go to the mic so people can hear?
Madam Mayor, there's one vacancy in the foundation unit. At Saturday at the meeting, there was a woman who came up to me and, because, back up for 1 second, we sent out letters to all the churches, and it was clear from our work session that we probably hadn't indicated the flexibility that we are willing to have on the foundation unit rentals. So this one woman came up to me and she said that when she was talking to our pollster, she said that she thought they ought to be for sale, but then she started to talk to me, and I think that she is interested in renting, and we actually calculated right there what 30% of her income was, and she said, well, I'm going to change my vote and vote for rentals, and she said, so tell your pollster that. But the point is, we are flexible on that, and with Sharon Campbell, we actually agreed to 30% of her income. And she showed us all of her retirement funds and Social Security and everything, and we agreed to that. So right now we have one unit empty, and we're ready to take anybody, including this woman who talked to me on Saturday.
So assuming all of those 8 units would be filled, then how do you, if we go with the option where we're creating the 7 affordable, how will I assume the 3 affordable will stay the same, but how do you plan to transition the foundation units into the affordable units?
Well, there's an issue about promising, which I think we've all agreed to, promising the people that are there that they can remain there. And so as soon as they would move out, we would right away convert them to an affordable rental. And we've actually, with Sharon Campbell, we're already there. With Brady Preston, we're already there. And with this other woman, we would also be there, because those rents are down in the $900 to $1,000 range. They're more at the moderate level.
Ms. Krummeller?
Well, so would you consider keeping 8 affordable rather than 7? I mean, one of my main concerns is the value that you offered in the developers agreement, as I see it, is evaporating. And I think that's why the $400,000 was being bandied about, is you were going to do that to make up for the down payment you were going to give the potential neighborhood preference owners. By the way, it was still, I understand it was going to be 3. I mean, under the current agreement, it's 3 affordable ownership units, that are qualified just like our other ownership units in Princeton, except it would be a Princeton preference, and it would be 5.
Actually, it's a Jackson Witherspoon, or Witherspoon Jackson preference.
Oh, that's what I meant. That's what I meant, neighborhood preference. And under the 5 units would be a below market, but more for the moderate income, like Michael Floyd was talking about. I would assume, given that 20% of the market rate is still pretty high. So anyway, why should we reduce the number of overall units? What about keeping 8 of them, so we don't have that problem that we're talking about, transitioning? One of them is going to have to, you're going to have to boot out someone under your proposal. So could we keep 8, in part to recognize the value that we're losing from the 400,000?
I think I could look at that. The reason we made it 7 was that the loss that having all those affordables created by having that one unit become a market unit, as I showed on that chart, we reduced that loss.
But would you consider 8?
I would consider it, but I haven't done that calculation.
Is there anybody else who wants to weigh in at this point? Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I'd like to start by saying that there is absolutely no question in my mind that the initial agreement that was put together by representatives of the neighborhood, by Mr. Hillier, and by Borough Council was done by people of good faith. And I know many of them that sat and worked on that agreement. And they had the best interest of the neighborhood in mind. But I think you've got to think back to 2002. We were on the upward part of a housing bubble. Housing prices were increasing rapidly toward the crash in 2007. And I think everybody who was looking at buying at that time had the impression that housing values were going to increase forever, and that buying a condo at that time was probably a pretty good investment, at least for the few years before 2007. 2007, the bottom fell out of the market, and some of the speakers here tonight have talked about that. But another thing happened in roughly the 10-year period from 2007 to now, and that is the income of people at the lower end and the middle of the income scale stagnated and hasn't increased very much in that time period. Hence, there are people who would like to buy but don't have the income that makes it possible then to buy. I think that all factors considered, there is an opportunity here to create more affordable housing that can be occupied by people who either live in the neighborhood or who are direct descendants of people who live in the neighborhood. And for that reason, I think that what is before us is good. It is good for the neighborhood, and it's good for Princeton.
Thank you. Ms. Howard?
Thank you. That was, it's hard to, Bernie, that was very articulate, so I'll just quite quickly assess. I have some history here, as do several of my colleagues here back on Borough Council. We've dealt with this. I wasn't on council when this was originally created, but dealt with the subsequent request to extend. So I have some familiarity, and I think I'm struck by Bernie's comment about how things have changed, and there's a lot of would've, could've, should've, and I think there's a real sense of that there was a missed opportunity here for the chance at home ownership, but and we can lament that, but regardless, it's a fact that the opportunity has gone and the situation is different now, it feels to me, and that window has closed, and that the best solution right now is the agreement before us for a couple of reasons. One, it protects the people who are current residents. Two, it really does seem to me that it's the closest in spirit to the original agreement in terms of honoring, preserving affordable housing for people from or descended from residents. And it's clearly what, you know, with significant input from the community, what the community recognizes as being the need. And we have broader struggles to find, to address affordable housing needs, and we're always striving to be better, but this seems like one opportunity to cement units now in the neighborhood for people from or descended from the neighborhood, and so I would plan to support. Thank you.
I'd like to offer, and it's a very simple amendment, Trishka, to this resolution, and then I'm going to make a motion, but the amendment is that we change the number from 7 to 8. And I don't know if, however I do that procedurally, I'd like to offer that as a change to the amendment. So I don't know if we need to introduce the resolution and then make an amendment. But I'm wondering if I can have a straw poll of support for changing the number from 7 to 8.
Yeah, but I actually, it's actually, unless Mr. Hillier changes his proposal, and then I'd add a whereas clause to that effect, you know, a lot of the resolution deals with what's been proposed, and then it just either approves or denies the proposal. So it's, unfortunately, until he changes his proposal, it's not as simple as just changing 7 to 8.
Okay, so I would like to ask I'd like to ask Mr. Hillier to change his number from 7 to 8.
Well, Well, he's considering that, whether he'll change that. Could I comment?
Yes.
Or do you have anything else you want to say about that?
No, I'm trying to figure out that happen.
Right. So he can confer, decide what he wants to decide. But, you know, I think the closest thing in spirit to the original agreement is the original agreement. I've spoken, we've touched base with our borough colleagues, and I think that they certainly have some misgivings about the decision in '09 to extend Mr. Hillier's agreement. You know, the borough accommodated him when he wanted to move from condominiums to rentals so that he could get his tax credit for the National Historic Register, and that required that it be rental for 5 years. They accommodated him then. They accommodated him again in '09 when his bank needed an extension, and it was a market downturn. And when it's hard to be in the moment and say that we are lamenting the '09 moment. If Mr. Hillier had had to sell then, that would have been a great buy for a lot of people in the neighborhood. Yes, times were tough. It was a tough economic downturn, but they would have had to sell at a lower price. We didn't force Mr. Hillier to do that, but in every transaction, there's sort of time proves that there are winners and losers. And the losers turned out to be the neighbors. And now we think, it's our assessment at this current moment, that a rental is somehow a better option. But the fact is, we won't know. Time will tell whether that was actually a better option. And we may look back on this in 5 or 10 years and say, that was really a missed opportunity, that if the neighbors could have bought in 2017, they would have been better off for all the reasons that Jenny mentioned earlier. They would have built equity. There's a lot of information that's been thrown out here, but Mr. Hillier talks a lot about that's his P&L. That's not the neighborhood's P&L. That's the neighborhood, the municipality is considering negotiating a deal that would reduce the number of units dedicated to the Witherspoon-Jackson neighbors. We're talking about going from 8 to 7 units. That's a decrease. We're talking about foregoing that $400,000, some amount of equity that Mr. Hillier would have helped provide through the Foundation for First-Time Home Buyers. That, Mr. Cumberbatch's lawyer spoke so eloquently about that at our August meeting, and now George has flipped, and that's his prerogative to do that. But there is an opportunity cost, and as we sit here tonight, we don't know what the opportunity cost will be for anybody who's currently in the neighborhood 10 years hence. So I think there's a lesson for the governing body to think about when we are looking at extending these deals that will fall to another governing body to decide. I would recommend that we think twice, but I'm in favor of holding Mr. Hillier to the first deal.
Mr. Quinn?
Thank you, Mayor. Turn that off. I think that Mr. Miller and I think all my colleagues on council have spoken eloquently, and so I won't take a lot of time with a big speech. I agree that I think everyone embarked on this in 2002 with the best intentions, and it was a noble plan. And as someone who comes from multi-generational renters, the idea of owning a house is strong, and Ms. Crummiller's right, everyone on the dais owns a house. And I think the most eloquent thing that I heard didn't come from my colleagues, with apologies to my colleagues, but came from Michael Floyd, who said, that was then and this is now. And I think we have a chance to help the neighborhood right now, and I think the best choice is not to put units up for sale that people who are living in right now clearly can't afford. We haven't heard anyone come up and say, I can afford whatever the numbers are. I can afford to buy the apartment I'm living in. But I'm hearing people say, I can afford, this is what I can afford, and someone saying, yeah, I'll cut you a deal on that. I agree with with Jenny and Joe that 8 is better than 7. That's the extent of my math knowledge. And as I say that, my wife never watches the meet. She's a math teacher, so she always jokes about my deficit in math, which is considerable. But I too, like Mr. Floyd, heard Mr. Hillier talk about a fund of some size for the neighborhood. So, you know, I think that all of my colleagues will agree with this statement, that we'd like to move on this, and I think it's in the community's best interest to decide this once and for all, but there are still some questions that need to be answered.
Mayor, can I say something else? I forgot. I don't think we can have the expectation that if we vote on this tonight for rental with the hope that this $400,000 fund reappears, we're whistling Dixie. I mean, we would have the leverage now before we make that decision. And I want to also acknowledge the compelling stories that we heard from people who are renters, and I don't want to appear that I'm not sympathetic to that at all. I really am, and I think that we could ask the people on our staff, on our housing, to affordable housing, to work with people if, in fact, this decision would result in anyone being without a home. The other thing is, you know, I'm just a little suspect of Mr. Hillier's efforts. He's been very accommodating and has found people to rent to in the last couple of weeks, but it was only since we made a point at the August meeting, and said, what do you mean you're sitting there with empty units? I mean, prior to that, what was going on? And the fact is, he also sold the building without any consultation with us as to what that might mean. So, and he told us in August that he sold it in March, but it turned out he sold it last year. So I think we've got a little bit of a credibility problem.
Okay. Just before you go, I just want to make sure, I know it's like a heated argument, I just want to make sure that we're all treating everybody with respect, both across colleagues and everybody here. But Mr. Hillier, did you want to were you wanting to say something? No? Oh, I thought, oh, you want a 5-minute break? Okay. I would recommend that we do a recess for 5 minutes.
I
then.
move we
That's
recess
fine.
for 5 minutes.
Okay. Is there a
fine.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, everybody, we're going to call this meeting back to order.
You'd rather do and not do the forum?
All right. Calling this meeting back to order. Thank you for your cooperation on this. We do want to keep the meeting moving because there's actually another neighborhood here for another issue. So, Mr. Hillier, did you want to come and let us know what you're thinking after the break?
Right. I think what we can do the 8, but they would be, what I'm proposing is 1 low, 2 low, 3 moderate, and 2 that would be middle income. And the middle income would be, these would be people that are making more than the moderate amount, and it would be 30%. And so that, let's say somebody came in and they were making $30,000 a year, and 5 years later they're making $50,000 a year, but they wanted to stay there, they would stay there, but the rent would be 30% of their income.
Well, what's the 7? What was the original 7 going to be? Can you tell me that?
It was going to be 3 low and 4 moderate. And so we're adding a low at the low end, and then we're putting in, according to Michael Floyd's suggestion, 2 at the medium, and we get the 8.
Okay.
But so before there were no middle income, it was all moderate or lower.
And there was no low either. And there is a desire to have a low.
I'd like to ask Trishka.
I'm redrafting a resolution on the fly, so can we go through those numbers again, please?
Yes, so it's 1 low, 2 low, 3 moderate, and 2 what's being called middle income, and I don't know how precisely that's being
That's a what's called a workforce housing.
Is that that's not
How
a
is it
COA.
defined?
I don't know if
how
that's
it-
defined under
I
state
don't know how
law.
that's defined.
I think that makes it more complicated because
It's like 130% of area median.
130% of what, Michael?
Area median income.
Of the area median income.
that's the county usually.
Yeah.
And it's not a COA term, you're right, but it's a very accepted term. You talk about one.
Right.
No, that's fine, but I just need to, I need to define what it means for purposes of this
So I
agreement.
think if we use the definition, if you want to speak, you should come to the microphone, but 130% of
Of the region's median.
of the
region.
region's median income.
The region is defined by COA.
Kate's on our housing board. She
Yes, I'm on the housing board. The town already has middle income. It's defined as 120% over median. So you already have that.
Okay, so we'll refer to the other median income.
We
Is that,
actually
I
have
check
like
with our
17
planner too. Is that, right?
Right.
Well, this is, none of these are, we're using the COA guidelines to qualify, but they're not COA units because of the neighborhood preference. All right, so my recommendation would be, I would just prefer for our attorney to have time to write this up, and my recommendation would be we put this on hold for and go through some of the ordinance introductions, and then we'll come back to this, and it'll just give Trishka a little bit of time. Is that all right, or
That's
I mean, we usually normally don't like to be drafting things on the fly, so I'm,
Not good practice. Sorry, not good practice.
I just want to ask Triska's advice if you feel comfortable with this process or not.
I'd really like the council to be able to take action on this tonight, so, yeah, let's
Right,
do
okay.
that.
Okay, all right, so we're going to put this discussion on hold.
Can I ask a question before you do that?
Is it about process or,
I think so.
okay?
The question is basically, but yeah, I think it is. And I asked Bob this afternoon in our phone conversation. The current owner is under no obligation to maintain the properties as rentals ad infinitum. Is that correct?
No, we received a letter from the owner's attorney that they would abide by the agreement. So we,
Okay.
that question came
But-
up at our prior
Yeah.
meeting, and we're satisfied.
So this is, it's going to be rentals forever and ever and ever.
I don't
Amen.
think we can guarantee that.
We
Can
can't. We can't guarantee that.
So that's my
Well, they could
question.
decide to
And-
go conduit
And then
some
the
other
question related to that is, if the owner is able to sell them or put them, on the market for sale, which, the market might change, would the owner then be obligated to sell those now 8 units in the same
They're
categories?
bound by this agreement until council agrees to change it.
Right, I think this will go into the deed, will
Right,
it
yeah.
not?
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
should we, I think that's an
I-
important
I-
question to ask
if-
the attorney.
If an owner was to decide to change it to condos, they'd have to come before you, and they would have to honor what we hopefully decide tonight
Right. Or,
in terms of affordables, et cetera.
right.
Do
Or
people
agree to change it. They do for these particular units, not for the entire property, but for the 8 units, because there's going to be an agreement with the town about those 8 units. Okay, so I would recommend that we skip ahead. Actually, if I could get should we amend the agenda for this for clarity? And then go back, or what's going to be the easiest for you? Okay, so is there a motion to amend the agenda to move next to the ordinance introduction?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Liverman,
Well,
second by
Wait,
Ms. Howard.
Mayor, could I just say one thing? Do we want to go to the other neighborhood and just get
That's
that
what we're
taken
doing.
care of? Okay, that's included?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor of amending the agenda to move on to ordinance introductions?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we're going to move on to 2017-51, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton concerning conditional uses in residential zoning districts and amending the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968, and the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974. And I'd like to, hi, I didn't see you there.
I'm really sorry, but I need to correct what I told you about middle income, because there was a lot of conversation about it at the Affordable Housing Board, so I want to read to you the definition. And the definition is unique to Princeton, middle income housing earning between 80 and 200% of the median income. So it's up to 200%.
Okay, why don't you talk to Dozier in the meantime, and when we come back, we'll get something that everybody agrees on. So I'd like to invite up Mr. Solo.
Okay. Do you need someone to move that ordinance? Or he's going to talk?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here.
Oh, and I would just ask if you're interested in this, we're going to come back to it tonight. We're just taking a short break, so if you want to stay, you're welcome to stay.
Okay, thank you, and good evening. Tonight, we have 3 ordinances that we're going to be discussing. They're viewed as staff as mostly clean up. They're items that we've been talking about getting done this year or last year, and we're trying to get them done this year. The first one, the ordinance that you just referenced, Mayor, deals with conditional use standards in our re-examination report from 2007. We've been talking about looking at the uses we permit as a conditional use. A conditional use is basically a permitted use in the zones that it's been identified as a conditional use. if that use meets whatever the conditions are. Some of them are quite lengthy and very detailed. Others of them are just very general and have some generic standards to it. So what the ordinance does, Ordinance 2017-51, it amends both the former borough and the former township conditional use standards. I'm going to take the township first, which is, so it's amending section 10B 320 of the ordinance, as well as section 17A 229 of the borough. Section 10B 320 lists all of the conditional uses in the former township. As I indicated, when there aren't specific standards for each of the conditional uses, the town does have general standards that would apply. The first being that there be no detriment to the public good, that there is a local need for the facility, any nuisance factors can be dealt with by buffering or by having distance from the property line regulations. And then finally, the traffic impacts can be minimized or mitigated. The ordinance does 5 different things. First, it clarifies that all municipal facilities would be conditional uses, and it specifically includes parks. Second, it modifies the language regarding railroad and public buildings. It becomes similar to what was in the borough. It also expands it slightly to include transformers and substations alike. When we talk about what was in the former borough ordinance, you'll see we're combining the two. The third thing it does is clarify that only public and private day schools are conditional uses, and that's the big change. It is just day schools. So boarding schools, if they're not in an existing E-zone, would become a use variance. It also amends it. We have found that most of the public and private schools in town that are K-8 are really pre-K, so we're making that small change as well. The fourth change it does, it treats adult daycare similar to child care. While I realize there's a huge age difference, the fact that we do allow daycare as part of our senior-friendly activities, we thought adult daycare should also be a conditional use in those zones. And then we're updating the language in the township code where it permits auto laundries, and we're changing that to car washes. We think most people are more familiar with car washes than auto laundries. And the borough, the conditional uses we're modifying are just for those in the residential zone, and that's found at 17A 299. The general standards that apply are found at section 17A 201, and they are simply that all structures be accessible for fire and police protection, and 2, that the development is appropriate for the site and does not significantly impact the environment or adjacent properties. We're making 6 changes to the borough conditional. We are doing the same clarification regarding municipal facilities. The second is we're doing a similar change for public and private day schools. The third is to permit assisted living in residential areas, and it removes, there was a clause that had buildings for the exclusive use of an educational institution or serving the educational institution. The planning board recently had an application where it was extremely difficult to figure out exactly what that meant, so we've recommended that we're taking that out. As I indicated earlier, it modifies the language regarding railroads, and it includes public utility buildings, pump stations, transformers and substations and the like. It removes amateur radio towers. When I checked with the staff, nobody remembers ever getting a conditional use for an amateur radio tower, so it's been well over 20 years since that. And then similar to what we were doing in the township, for child and adult care facilities and nursery schools would be permitted in these residential zones. The underlying residential zone standards would apply, but these would become conditional uses. That's a quick summary of the changes. I don't know if council has questions for me before you introduce it.
Are there any questions from council? Is there anybody from the public who'd like to speak on this? No? Okay, is there a motion then to
So
introduce?
moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Ms. Howard and seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Madam Clerk, please read the roll.
Yes.
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 So the ordinance is introduced. The public hearing for this ordinance will be on October 23rd. And is this going to the planning board in the interim?
It will, yeah, we haven't picked that date. We were waiting to see if it was introduced. It'll go to the planning board for review for consistency with the master plan.
Okay, so for neighbors who are interested, you can check with the planning board staff and they can let you know when it'll be on the planning board agenda. But their review is just to see if it's consistent with the master plan, but it'll come back to council for a public hearing on the 23rd. So moving on, we have 2017-52, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton revising the definition of floor area to address cathedral ceiling space and amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974, and the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. Mr. Solo, you want?
Thank you again, and I'll be brief on this one. I think the title basically says what we're doing. A year or so ago, we amended the definition to capture within the FAR the cathedral space. We were doing that, you may recall, as part of our neighborhood character study, and we made the change, and I think it does capture some additional space to help bring house sizes down. What we didn't realize at the time was how it was exactly worded, and it does have an impact on non-residential structures that have more commonly a two-story space. So the ordinance before you makes it clear that it only applies to 1- and 2-family dwellings.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from council? Is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Second.
That was like from here and here. I was going to say, we'll have it introduced by Mr. Miller and seconded by Ms. Butler. Madam Clerk, please read the roll.
Yes.
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 And this ordinance has been introduced, and the public hearing will be also on October 23rd, 2017. Next is 2017-53, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton concerning land use fees and amending Chapter 10B of the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. Mr. Solo, do you want to describe this one too?
Yes. What we're doing here is adding 2 fees. The first adds a fee and an escrow charge. That's found at page 4 of the ordinance. It's a $300 fee with a $2,000 escrow. It's for applicants or developers requesting relief from a conditional of an approval. What that is typically the planning board will have a series of conditions, most of which are complied with every once in a while, and it's been happening a little bit more recently than in the past, but we have somebody asking for relief from one of the conditions or to change that. We don't have a fee or an escrow to cover the cost of processing that. This would provide that so that basically it follows with our plan of having applicants or developers bear the cost of the application. The second is found on page 5 of the ordinance, and it increases the fee for publications from $35 to $50. That's being done to reflect the actual cost that we're being charged. I don't know if there are any questions from council on either of those.
Just that there's a typographical error in the way that's written here, but I think I know what you mean.
On which page?
It says, yeah, it says 3 in front of the 50. I don't know if that's how you want to put it.
Oh, yes, it should be, that's it. It's a $50 fee. We can correct it. Was a $35.
Yeah.
I think just 3 is in the brackets.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the ordinance on page 5, if you look at where it says section 10B 63 publication charge, in brackets there's just a 3. It should be 35. It's just a typo. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion to
So
introduce?
moved.
Moved by Ms. Howard and seconded by Ms. Krumiller. Madam Clerk, please read the roll.
Yes.
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 And the ordinance is introduced, and the public hearing will be on October 23rd. Next is 2017-54, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton authorizing the acquisition of easements for traffic signal improvements at the intersection of North Harrison Street and Hamilton Avenue from Block 31.03, Lot 60, which is 277 Hawthorne Avenue, Block 31.02, Lot 75.02, which is 88 North Harrison Street, Block 32.07, Lot 177, which is 200 Hamilton Avenue, and Block 32.12, Lot 1, Queenston Commons, for a total amount not to exceed $25,000.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. I'll see you in October for
Thank
the
you.
public
Yeah,
hearing.
thanks, Lee. And we'll turn over to Ms. Stockton for any explanation of this ordinance.
This is related to our Safe Routes to School project for the replacement of traffic signals at Harrison and Hamilton and Harrison and Franklin. As the property was surveyed, we found that the sidewalks at the Hamilton Avenue intersection are partially existing on private property. And so this is to correct that situation to get permanent easements for the right-of-ways. And that is a condition of our federal grant, that we certify that we have all of the right-of-way in hand.
Are there any questions for Ms. Stockton? Is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Howard and seconded by Mr. Quinn. And a
I-
question from Mr. Miller.
Dana, have all the property owners been notified of this?
They have not yet. First, we were working to have the ordinance introduced, and then we would be reaching out to the property owners and making offers to them.
Thank you.
What if they don't agree?
Well, then there is a condemnation process.
Okay. Let's hope we don't go that route. All right. So the ordinance has been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call a roll.
Yes.
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 The ordinance has been introduced, and the public hearing will be on October 23rd, 2017. And we'll move on to resolutions. So the first resolution is 17-299, resolution authorizing the award of a contract to Navistar Incorporated through Hunter's Truck Sales and Services via the National Joint Powers Alliance contract for vehicles and how do you pronounce that? Chassis class 6, 7, and 8. Chassis contract number 081716 NVS for 2 new 2018 International 7400 SFA 4x2 SA525 dump trucks for use by the Department of Public Works and the Princeton Sewer Operating Committee in the amount of $301,276, which is $150,638 per truck. Is there a motion to approve? Moved by
Second.
Mr. Miller and seconded by Ms. Crumiller. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes. Next is 17-300, resolution authorizing the award of a contract to Alltech Industries Incorporated via the National Powers Alliance contract for public utility equipment with related accessories and supplies, contract number 031014 ALT, for a new Alltech model AT37G bucket truck for use by the Department of Public Works and the Princeton Sewer Operating Committee in the amount of $98,451. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. So moved.
Moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Mr. Miller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Well,
Oh,
could I
sorry,
just say,
Ms.
I
Butler?
think it's worth noting that the previous 2 truck purchases were replacements for older trucks. This is a new, this would be a new truck to the fleet, but the only bucket truck we have now, they have to borrow from the tree, and I think we're going to have a big need coming up with
Yeah.
the Emerald Ash Borer for a second.
Unfortunately, it's true.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Can I point out to my colleagues that, once again, we will spend $400,000 on some beautiful, new equipment. And
I know.
we have nowhere to put it.
I know.
Well, soon it will be in a cold storage facility. One hope. All right.
I'm holding my breath.
All right. 17301, resolution authorizing the award of a professional services agreement to Van Note Harvey Associates for professional engineering and surveying services related to the Princeton landfill as-built survey of the solar field for the Princeton Sewer Operating Committee for an amount not to exceed $18,700. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Howard,
Se-
seconded by Mr. Liverman. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 17-302, resolution authorizing a professional services agreement with Brightview Engineering LLC in an amount not to exceed $32,320 for professional traffic engineering design services for an upgraded traffic signal at the Valley Road, Witherspoon Street, Mount Lucas Road intersection. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Quinn,
Second?
seconded by Mr. Liverman. Any questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? This resolution passes unanimously. Next is 17303, resolution authorizing a...
Mayor, can we bundle these next four that are, aren't they all related to the?
Sure. Do you want to make a motion to...
I would move we consider 17303, 17304, 17305, and 17306 together.
Okay. And these all relate to the preparing of the site for the new PFARS facility.
Number 7 is related to a grant application for Cherry Valley. So just to make that distinction. Not Cherry Hill, Cherry Valley.
Oh, so it's not related to this?
No.
Okay, I will withdraw my motion and recommend we put 5, 6, and 8 together.
Why don't we do it in order, because I think it just makes it easier. Let's do 5 and 6 together. If you wouldn't mind, I think it just makes it easier.
So moved.
6, I see what you're saying.
Is that all right?
Just whatever.
Okay.
Just go.
We're still waiting for Trishka, too. All right, it's been moved by Ms. Howard. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Liverman. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Then we'll pick up 17305, which is the resolution authorizing the submittal of a fiscal year 2018 municipal aid grant application and execution of a grant contract with the New Jersey Department of Transportation for improvements to Cherry Valley Road. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Miller, seconded by Ms. Krummeller. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Next is 17306, resolution authorizing a professional services agreement with Environmental Management Associates in a not-to-exceed amount of $14,910 for the installation and repair of monitoring wells at the vacant Valley Road former Public Works Yard site, Block 7002, Lot 1, groundwater sampling and analysis in preparation of a remedial action work plan. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Quinn, seconded by Ms. Krummeller. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next is 17307, resolution authorizing an agreement with John Zampini for 2017-2018 bow hunting deer management services on certain public lands for an amount not to exceed $10,000. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Ms. Krummeller, seconded by Ms. Howard. Any questions on this?
Yes, actually, I do have some questions on this one. Do you know what the overall goal is for the bow hunting? And I'm hoping Jeff can answer that. Or I don't want to distract you, Tricia. if
That's
you're-
okay. You didn't actually. I was able to get done what I needed
All
to
right.
get done. So, and thank you for rearranging the agenda for that. There's no stated goal. There's no specific target for the bow hunters. It's basically remove as many deer as they can from the properties that they're allowed to hunt. The overall goal for the entire program is to remove as many deer as necessary to get the population down to 20, what we call 20 overwintering deer per square mile, which has been sort of the long-standing goal. And I think for years, Princeton has been close to that number, but not quite there.
Right, I guess I'm just wondering how we know, if we don't know how many we have, do we know how many we have now? They're going to try to take away down to this number of 20 overherding per square. and
It's
then
an
we-
average and it's an approximation. I mean, it's not exact to the doe or the buck, but how we know, what Princeton has done for many years now is about every other year or every 3 years, it does what's called distance sampling, which is a technique for getting, it's still an estimate, but it's a very accurate estimate of your deer population. And White Buffalo has recommended that Princeton do another distance sample this fall and early winter to get a fix on the numbers. And then in between those distance samplings, you use your motor vehicle accident statistics, the deer cull numbers, the pregnancy rates. I mean, there are a whole number of factors that they then use to estimate that year's population. One of the reasons that they're recommending doing a distance sample this fall is that with the turnover in animal control officers, the statistics for 2016 and 2017 are not as reliable as they have been in the past. And last year's harvest was very, very low because of weather conditions and some other factors. So this is the first year they've not even been able to give us their own best estimate of what the herd is.
Okay.
I guess I'm just having a recollection that we came back, that the $10,000 2 years ago, or the last time we had a decent call, we ended up having to spend more than that.
Well, there's two different things. There's what you spend on White Buffalo, because they're paid by the hour. This $10,000 is specific for the bow hunters to compensate them for processing excess deer, and it's really to give them an incentive to get out there.
yeah.
And we didn't come anywhere close to that number
Yeah,
last year, nor do we think we will this year.
Just to clarify, so Trishka, this investment hopefully saves us on what we have to pay later for White Buffalo, I think is the way to
Very
think
much
of it.
so. And
Yeah.
in fact, one of White Buffalo's specific recommendations coming out of last year's call was to give the bow hunters greater access and try to rely on them more, because the more they can do early in the season, the better and the more efficient White Buffalo can be.
And my last question related to this is, I see Christmas is out, but Thanksgiving isn't. I mean,
That's per state law.
per state law.
Yes.
I would think people might be out on Thanksgiving walking around, taking a walk, but
I usually am trying to work off the turkey coma,
Or
but
prepare
so
for the-
I don't know
I
what
know, it
what
feels
the
a little
rationale is at the state.
frightening, but okay.
But these are the dates that are established by the state.
Okay, so I'll move it. Did we move it? Yeah, we did. Moved and seconded, right. Okay.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that resolution passes, and now we'll go back to the work session resolution, and Trishka, can you just help remind us where we are and what we're be voting on?
And also, let me get back to the correct set of notes here. Okay. So where we left off was Mr. Hillier revised his proposal, and instead of 7 units, there will now be 8 units consisting of 1 very low-income unit, 2 low-income units, 3 moderate-income units, and 2 middle-income units. We looked in Princeton's affordable housing regulations, and a middle-income unit is defined as a unit affordable to someone earning between 80 and 150% of the median income for the region. And that, I would recommend that we just refer to that definition. So I had put together a resolution for the council's consideration, which, as you know, had a blank at the very end. If you are interested in Mr. Hillier's revised proposal, I've figured out how to amend the resolution to reflect that, and I'd be happy to read that into the record. The one thing I would ask is, what I read into the record, like, I've done my best drafting on the fly at 9:30. If you can give me a little leeway, if tomorrow I need to just make some tweaks to the language that would not alter the substance, it would just be to clean it up a little bit. But so this would be revising the last page of the resolution. In place of the the middle 3 whereas clauses. So in other words, you take out, whereas the council interprets this as a request to blah, 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 you would take that one out, the next whereas, and the whereas after that. And in their place, insert, whereas Hillier amended his proposal on the record as follows. The 5 foundation units and 3 affordable units will be converted into 1 very low-income unit, 2 low-income units, 3 moderate-income units, and 2 middle-income units, all as defined by the Council on Affordable Housing and/or Princeton's Affordable Housing Regulations. And whereas the 8 units will be rental units instead of sale units, and whereas all other terms and conditions of the 2002 Developers Agreement as amended in 2003 will remain in full force and effect, including the requirement that the units be rented to applicants who have resided in the John Witherspoon neighborhood for at least 10 years or to direct descendants of such neighborhood residents. And whereas this resolution, when passed by the council and countersigned by Hillier, shall be deemed to amend the Developers Agreement as set forth in the foregoing, I believe it's in the foregoing 3 paragraphs. And then whereas the council has considered the request and the information presented to it by Hillier and the public, now therefore be it resolved, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. I think it would behoove us to put this on the table if there could be a motion to approve in a second, and then we can have discussion if there wants to be
I
discussion.
make a motion that we approve as
Second.
written.
Okay, so
Second.
it's been moved by Mr. Liverman and seconded by Ms. Howard, and I'd like to open it up if anybody has any comments. Yeah, Ms.
Yeah, I mean,
Carmiller?
you know, I was very much against turning these units into rental, and to tell you the truth, I still am, but I see the writing on the wall. And so, and I listened to, not a single person came, and so I did listen to the stories of what people were saying, so I will vote in favor of this, and thank you, Mr. Hillier.
Anybody else? All right.
No, I was going to defer to the other end, but I do have something to say.
Okay.
I am not going to support this. I think that this adjustment, we are still leaving a huge contribution in equity in the neighborhood and to the neighborhood, to the good people of Witherspoon Jackson on the table. I think it was significant. We've got, I don't think the arrangement of these numbers, we've added 1 unit to get back to the 8 that would have been offered for sale, but they're being offered to middle income. And so we have 3 moderate and 3 middle income. Those are the people who probably could have benefited from the contribution in equity. So those people, you know, I feel like might have been potential buyers. We heard a lot of very moving stories tonight about people in the on the very lowest end, but we're still at sort of 3 units. It doesn't, and it seems to me we've lost the contribution in equity in the neighborhood that could have really helped people. And I feel strongly that 10 years hence we will look back and people will have, they'll wish they had purchased today. As tough as it may be, home ownership over the long haul has proven to be the best way for people to accumulate wealth in their lifetime. And we know that it is particularly difficult in the African American community. They've been hardest hit on that, and wealth was wiped out in the 08 economic downturn, and it's never been restored. And yes, my colleague is right that low and middle income wages have stalled, but it's also been the wealth issue has never returned to the African American community. And we had a chance to do that, I think, by asking Mr. Hillier to return the units to sale and let the market work its magic. But my colleague says she sees the handwriting on the wall, but you are the handwriting on the wall. You could vote to deny.
Just a point of clarification, please. I'm sorry. What is the spread between the units again? I thought it was 1 very low, 2 low, 3 moderate, and 2 middle.
Correct.
Okay. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I thought it said Joe say 3 middle, and that scared me. Okay.
Okay.
So I call for a vote, I guess?
Yes, please.
Yes. I call for
All
a vote.
right. It's been moved and seconded already, so all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm opposed. I thought we were going to go I thought the way this was written, we were going to go allow or deny, or so, I thought we had decided
Well,
how
this,
to
yes,
Approved
you're
or
correct.
declined.
approve or decline, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, that's true. The way the resolution is that the be and is hereby is still blank, so.
Oh, did you not fill that in when you were reading it to us?
I did not. I should have.
Okay.
So, but
All right, so who moved it? Was it Ms. Howard or Mr. Liverman?
I moved it.
All right, so.
Do I need to withdraw?
So is it easiest we vote where we go approve, deny? Is that what you want us to do?
Yes.
whatever's your pleasure. It could either be, yeah, why don't we do, if
Okay.
that may be
Approve
the
or
All right.
case at this point. Yes.
Kathy, can you call the roll and for the resolution, and council members should vote by saying either approve or deny.
Approve.
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 Deny.
Approve.
Okay, so the resolution passes with the proposal being approved. So again, I want to thank Mr. Hillier. I want to thank all members of the neighborhood and friends of the neighborhood who came out. And I know we ran pretty late, so apologies for everybody who left, who might be watching now from home. But I think well, I don't need to add to what my colleague said. I think we all wish the world were a perfect place, but I feel like we do have to act in the reality of where we are. So I want to thank Mr. Hillier for his flexibility and for the neighborhood for stepping up and working together on a good solution. So good night, everybody. You're welcome to stay for the consent agenda.
And thanks, Trishka, for your
Oh,
Yes.
crafting on the fly. there.
Yeah, do we want to do the five-year
You guys
capital,
love to
Mark?
keep me
You
on my
still
toes.
have, yeah, why don't we do that since we're here and it's on the agenda, might as well. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I also want to thank Trishka for the record for the last minute, on the fly drafting. I know it's
It's what
never
keeps me on my
anybody's
toes.
favorite, so thank you for making that work tonight.
She has to go. Thank you. You were a showstopper, Mark. Everybody left.
So did the projector.
The five-year projection for this year. Just to remind council, we started a process last year of early on doing a projection of the next 5 years of the finances and budget forecasts, including the revenues and expenditures for 5 years. The purpose of this exercise is really to look at the finance from a long-range perspective and to look for trends. And again, this is just an analysis and a projection. It's not meant to forecast exactly what's going to happen, but really to give us some overarching themes moving forward with the budget process. So I'll walk you through each piece of it. The first piece of that that you see before you is the revenue side of the budget. And as you can see here, and I'll just walk through some of the highlights of, in particular, the 2018 budget. You'll see in the 2018 budget, starting with the surplus that we anticipate in the budget, that has been reduced a bit. That's to take into account last year we used $130,000 for a one-time expense for the studies for the neighborhood character. That expense and that revenue has been taken out of the budget for 18. One thing I will say in general, as you can see through these projections, our revenues have been constant. There are some weaknesses that we'll talk about a little bit later on in some areas, but you'll see, as you can see, that there really is little growth in revenue throughout the years as we projected. One area that has been of some concern is municipal court. We think we've kind of found that sweet spot in terms of really estimating what the revenues are in the court. We expect that, again, to stay steady at the rate that it is at this point. So that's one area that I did want to highlight.
Wait, why did you want to highlight that?
Because over the last 2 years, it's been going down. We've been hard. It's been hard for us to estimate what that costs are. I think we've found the right number. The next issue that I'll bring to your attention in terms of revenues moving forward, as we talked about last year, if you go down to the very bottom where it talks about the reserve for debt service, last year we had $750,000 in reserves for debt service. As we talked about, that is one revenue that we talked about stepping down. Last year was the last year for that revenue. This year it is gone. That does create a $750,000 hole in this year's budget, but it's something that we have planned for. So you'll see that in this year's budget. In addition, the other thing that I do want to highlight for you is the assessment growth figure. When we did this last year, we looked at a couple of major projects that we know would be coming online. This does not include all assessments. These are just some major projects where we know exactly what the new numbers will be coming in. That includes Avalon Bay, I believe the shopping center, and one more project that we know is coming online. So reflected, we had those reflected there. The other area that I'll highlight, you'll see a big jump, jumping back up to the capital reserves. As you're aware, our capital plan, part of our capital plan was to use the capital reserves to manage our debt to ensure that it doesn't increase more than 1.5% each year. We've been putting about $600,000 to kind of make sure that our debt only increases by 1.5%. With the new bond sale this year, we're going to have to put a little more, not a little more, significantly more money in it. So it's gone up to $355,000. That's to take care of the bump of the first year of those the bonds that are coming on. We could probably bring it back down the next year, but that is one source of revenue that will cease as of 2021. But we understood that that's part of our long-range plan in terms of controlling our debt. So as you can see from the proposals, overall revenue is down. Most of it is at $750,000 for that we knew about that would be going out based on the reserve for debt service. Do we have any questions on the revenue side?
Is the open space just in the assessment? I mean, the assessment.
It's not reflected here. I'm only dealing with the current fund budget in revenues, so I've not shown it here at all.
Okay.
The open space. It's in a separate budget. That's why it's not shown here.
Is the surplus anticipated where it should be? I noticed over the course of the years.
Actually, we seen last year, and I'm not sure we would have to do an analysis. Last year, we actually grew more than we anticipated.
Okay.
We'll do that analysis early on this year to see where we are, and that number may be adjusted depending on what the estimates look like. There's no questions with the revenue? Next, we'll go to the expenditure side of the budget. And what we have here is our estimates on salary and wages for the next year, other expenses, and I will just go through and kind of highlight some that I believe are of importance. The one area on accumulated leave, we reduced that from last year to $75,000. Yes, last year we did have a number of retirements. This year, at least based on what we have at this point, we don't see that, so you'll see a reduction in the amount of money needed for the accumulated leave. And the accumulated leave is really to pay, because this always comes up, it's to pay for people's vacation time at the time of retirement. Liability insurance, and again, our drivers in our budget are our insurances, both our liability insurance and our employee group insurance. One thing I also did was really look at the projections from last year and see where we could make adjustments based on what actually occurred last year. One of the areas we had presented were the employee group insurance. We were previously estimating about an 8.5% increase in that budget. That's where we created a lot of savings last year. The projections were significantly lower. I mean, the actuals are significantly lower. So I've reduced that projection this year to about 5% instead of the 8.5% previously used. And again, some of the big, that's still not known. We don't have the numbers from the state, New Jersey, on our employee benefits. So that's right now our best guess of what that would be. The other two areas, which are drivers, are pensions, which are PERS and PFRS. And again, what I did here was just make estimates. It's a 5% for PERS and a 10% for PFRS. These are one of the numbers that I think will be the big swings. It will depend on when these numbers come out. Luckily, last year we had these numbers by this time of the year. We have not this year. So those numbers may change. They could change. They may be lower. They may be a little higher. So that's where we are there. The other major increase, if you go down to the capital improvement fund, last year we had some money left in our capital improvement fund from the prior year, so we were able to fund the $707.5 million in capital projects. We have to have a 20% down payment. Since we no longer have money in the capital improvement fund, we had to increase our down payment, so we pay the full 20% through the current fund, which is $375,000 versus the $350,000 from last year. The next piece we have here, and I know some members of the Finance Committee reviewed this at the last Citizens Finance Committee, and I've changed this to actually add in the actual change in the debt service based on our last bond sale that we just had. And you'll see in the first year, the debt service has gone up to $1.7 million, and then $500,000 for the notes that we currently have. One of the big things you'll see here that we're trying to do is, if you look to the special emergencies in 2017, that's the last year of the special emergency. We're now taking those funds, and we talked about this a little last year. There are some ordinances that have not been funded in our capital fund that are required to, at this point, we cannot bond them because they're old. We have to raise it through cash. So we're going to be using that $383,000 now to fund those bond ordinances moving forward. So you'll see in the line it talks about old debt. That's to pay off those projects that can no longer be, we can no longer actually issue bonds for. We'll pay those off in cash over the next couple of years. And then you'll see the line, which is in red, it says up to the debt amount. One of the things in our capital budget policy is that we want to keep the debt at about $10 million, so we have a steady debt limit. So you'll see that in the year 2020, there's about $1.5 million in that line. That's really there as a placeholder moving forward because our debt is dropping. Part of that will be used up if we do additional temporary financing. We may be able also at that point, potentially, depending on how things work out, that may be an area where we can increase the cash capital that we can use during those periods of time. And you'll see we'll continue to do the $200,000 in cash capital moving forward. Bottom line, based on our projections, both the expenditures and revenues, we're projecting in 2018 $1.6 million increase in the amount to be raised. And again, this is a beginning of the process for us. We've been very conservative because a number of the major drivers we don't have numbers for at this point, so we're using estimates. So this is a very conservative budget, and we're at 1.6. I think we need to be very conscious of what we're doing, but I think we're at a place where it's manageable. At this time, we'll continue to go through the numbers, and they will change over the next couple of months. But this is an idea just to give you kind of where we are in terms of the budget moving forward. Any questions?
I know, oh, I'm sorry. No, the slide prior to this one, when we talked about expenses, we looked at the insurance, employee insurance, and that went from like $4 million to like $6 or $7 million, like within the 5 years. Are we still looking at brokers in regard to finding?
Actually, we received I did put out an RFP this August. I've received those RFP back. We're going to be reviewing those and taking a look at those to see what there are additional savings potentials we may have.
Yeah, because that was a major increase.
You know, I remember when the borough looked at it, it was always cheaper to just keep with the state. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, we tried. I mean, it might be different now, but I don't hold out hope. The accumulated leave, we stopped accumulating leave, right? Didn't we?
That's why I made the distinction that it's for your earned vacation time that you may have.
Oh, they still accumulate
right.
vacation time?
Correct.
Okay.
So at your end, you'll get paid for your vacation time that you're owed.
Fine job.
But Mark, you didn't include the projections about the tax increase? You had them, when we looked at it in CFAC, did you have it?
Oh, actually, I must have cut it off. It's, to give you an idea,
Because
if you look at
those numbers are a little bit.
If you look at 2018,
Upsetting.
it's about a 4 point, and it's changed a little bit from the last time you see it. 2018 is about 4.8%, and then I think the rest of them are they're roughly around the same area, around a 4%, just under 4% increase.
So it's not insignificant.
Yeah.
But then again, and I don't want people to panic, and again, we were here last year. We need to be aware of it. We need to manage it. These are projections, and they're conservative. These numbers will change as we kind of cull through the budget this year.
But you remember that last year we worked on this and we were unable to really make any significant change, and here we are again, so good luck.
Thank you. It's beautiful.
Thank you. That's very nice. I make a motion that we, the consent agenda, that we take the consent agenda in block. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So moved.
Aye.
Second.
Aye.
No. Actually, we're done. And we actually got through them. This is